Welcome. All right. Is anybody else as happy as I am to be back in our home for an annual town meeting? Welcome home. My name is Buzz Eisenberg, and I'm town moderator, and therefore I'll be chairing today's annual town meeting. No quorum is required by our bylaws, so I formally call us to order. This meeting is called to order. There are our fire exits, 2 in the front and 2 in the back. And at this point, I will ask our town clerk, Alexis Fedorchenko. I'm sorry, what? I cannot understand. What are people saying? Okay. The meeting is in session right now, so town clerk, Alexis, please read the return of the warrant.
Franklin SS, to any of the constables of the town of Ashfield in the county of Franklin, greetings. In the name of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, you are hereby directed to notify and warn the inhabitants of said town, qualified to vote in elections and in town affairs, to meet at the town hall in Ashfield on Saturday, the 7th day of May, 2022 at 10 o'clock in the morning, then and there, to act on the following articles. There are 33 articles. And you are directed to serve this warrant by posting up attested copies thereof at the Ashfield Town Hall and the Ashfield Post Office in said town, 7 days at least before the time of holding said meeting. Hereof fail not and make due return of this warrant with your doings thereon to the town clerk at the time and place of meeting as aforesaid. This was signed by the Ashfield Select Board, Steve Goodgen, Thomas Carter, and Todd O'Lanick on the 19th day of April, and posted by Constable Elizabeth LeJour 15 days before the date of the meeting.
Thank you. We require all non-registered voters to sit in the flanks on the west side and the east side. Are there any non-registered voters, non-voters, seated in any of these 3 blocks? Okay, for those who are not registered voters of Ashfield, you may speak to an issue only with permission of the meeting, and you may not vote, obviously. So if you adhere to those 2 conditions, then we welcome you. We're glad you're here. I hope that you each have the handouts that have been provided there in the back table out in the foyer there. If you haven't gotten handouts, they will be there. That will include the warrant that contains the articles that we're going to be considering today. Remember that the copy of the posted warrant that you're going to be given is going to be different than the actual motion that is made. There's a little bit too much talking in the house, I think. So thank you. Talk quietly if you want. So remember that the motion is going to be different than what you read on that warrant. It's my obligation to ensure that any motion or any amendment is within the scope of what was posted, so that you can be assured that we'll be entertaining only lawful motions. We traditionally advance Article 1 before all other matters that we're going to be handling before we begin going through all the articles in our warrant, so that we can open the polls downstairs and begin the ballot voting downstairs. So those who are waiting to cast their ballot, we can get them going. Hearing no objection, any objections to entertaining Article 1 out of order so we can open the polls? Hearing no objection, traditionally we ask the Constable, Martha Pantermel, to... Is Martha here? Yeah, there you are, Constable. Can you tell us what the condition of the ballot box is right now?
Yes, I locked it and it's empty and the numbers are on 0.
Masterfully done. You did a great job. Thank you very much. So the ballot box is in. So, is there a motion with respect to Article 1?
Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Carter.
Mr. Moderator, I move that the town choose the following elected positions. 1 assessor for 3 years, 1 Board of Health member for 3 years, 1 constable for 3 years, 1 Finance Committee member for 3 years, 1 Finance Committee member for 3 years, 1 Library Trustee for 5 years, one moderator for 1 year, one park commissioner for 3 years, one park commissioner to fill an unexpired term for 2 years, one planning board member for 5 years, one planning board member to fill an unexpired term for 4 years, one select board member for 3 years, one sewer commissioner for 3 years, one tree warden for 1 year, and to further close the polls at 4 p.m.
Is there a second?
Second.
Something's wrong with this mic, right?
It's the operator.
Okay, the motion was made and seconded to open the polls downstairs. Any discussion? All in favor of opening the polls, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstention? That passes unanimously. Okay, at this time, I'd like to introduce the folks at the front table who have brought us to this point. And every year we have so much to be grateful for. Their efforts are always unbelievable. I know I appreciate it. This is Paul McClatchy, your the third, your town administrator, who's worked tirelessly to get us here. Our town clerk, Alexis Fedorchenko, also a lot of work went in from the town clerk's office to get us here today. Our select board is Chair Steve Goodgen, Tom Carter, Todd Olanek, closest to me. Our finance committee, unfortunately, 2 of our members are not able to attend today. They both have very good reasons for not being here. That is the chair, Tom Miner, and Carol Legal. But here with us is Kyle Taylor, closest to me, Ben Markins, and Lindy Goodgen. And can we just, I think also, Ben, you want to make a comment about one of your colleagues right now. Is that right?
I'd be pleased to. Well, sure. So I've been Marcus Bellis Road. I just want to acknowledge both the colleagues who are not here, and Lindy Goodgen, our colleague and past chair, who is retiring at the end of this meeting, and really has been an important part. And I'd like you all just to join me in thanking Lindy for her part.
Yes, thank you, Lindy. I'd like to identify the tellers who are willing to help us in the event that we need their count on any particular article, and they are Judy Halp. Judy? Thank you, Judy. They are Tom McCrum. I think Judy and Tom know each other. Sandy Lilly. Sandy? Sandy's not here yet? I hope she's not counting people from outside. And Marcine Eisenberg, whom I know quite well. At this time, this is the point in our meeting where we recognize and reflect the members of our family, of our friends, our neighbors who have departed since our last annual town meeting. If you're able, please stand as I read their names, follow my own reflection. This year is a little bit different. Always before, what we've done is identify those people who have died. Here in Ashfield, we have death certificates, and the town clerk has provided their names. That means we have missed out on some people. This year, thanks to Alexis Fedorchenko, our town clerk, she's poured through Ashfield News, and she's got me names of loved ones of ours who didn't die in Ashfield, and therefore we don't have a death certificate from them here, but we're going to recognize them, which means I will spend a little less time on each name than I usually do. It's usually 14 to 16 names, and this year is 31 names. So, but at the end, we will have a pause, and we can reflect on all of them together. So, Philip Nolan, Paul William Maynard, Marion Fitzgerald, Phyllis Kirkpatrick, Paul Edward Bacon, Janet Marion Martin, Peter Damaris Adams, Mario Espinola, Martin Allen Landy, Gloria Laurie, Nancy E. Gardner, Susan Kudnahowski, Roger House, Charity Richer, Irene Newell, Walter Zelensky, Noah Gordon, Theodore Mitchell Pease Jr., Floyd A. Parker, John Discavige, Elizabeth Forbes, Thomas Joseph Cushman Jr., Randy A. Poshinin, Gordon G. Newell, Yoshiko F. Turner, Paul W. Alice, Glenn Edward Sperling, Frank C. Goditis, Thomas V. Olanek, Rhonda Parker Thompson. Can we take a minute and remember them with gratitude? Never enough time spent remembering, but thank you. This is everybody's favorite part, as required by our 1849 bylaws. I will now read the bylaws that govern the conduct of our town meeting. Our code of bylaws. All persons present at any town meeting shall, while the meeting is open, be seated when requested by the presiding officer, if there be sufficient seats. Therefore, if not, they shall stand at the west end of the hall. When anyone addresses the chair, he shall rise and stand uncovered during his speaking. No one shall stand in front of the chair or around the moderator's stand when votes are being counted or given in, except as they are called upon to do so by the chair. There shall be no talking about the house while the business is being done, and all shall keep silence at the request of the chair when needed. No one shall speak on the same question more than twice without leave of the meeting, or to explain, or to call to order. No one shall interrupt another while speaking except to call a person to order. When several motions are made in regards to the same subject, relating to sums of money, or numbers, or time, the question shall be first put upon the largest sum or number and the longest time. In all other cases, no new motion shall be made while one is pending, except as an amendment, or a motion to commit, or a motion to adjourn. When a vote decided by the moderator is questioned, it shall be made certain by persons on either side rising and standing in their places uncovered till counted by the moderator or tellers appointed by him. The reports of all committees relating to money or property shall be in writing. All motions and amendments shall be in writing when required by the chair or by any person in the meeting. No person shall be allowed to move the reconsideration of any vote unless he or she has voted in the majority or not voted at all. No peddling or smoking shall be allowed in the hall during the meeting, and this code of bylaws shall be read by the presiding officer or by the town clerk at each annual meeting. So thank you for bearing with us for that. You can see that there is a mic stand with a microphone, which hopefully is working, in the aisle over there, and there is one closer to me. If we are having a discussion where a lot of people wish to speak, then I ask you, instead of me having to remember what order you put your hands up, just come here. I will remind you. Come stand in line at the microphone, and then we'll take you as you in order in that line. If we don't have a whole lot of hands going up, then we probably don't need to do that. If you are there, please use the microphone. This warrant contains 33 articles. We want every voter to know what he or she is being asked to vote on. So rather than reading each article as it appeared in the warrant, our friends here have created copies for you. Is there anyone who doesn't have a copy of the warrant? There are 3 of you. They are out there. I think Sandy's going to trip as she goes and gets your copies. So instead of reading everything in a motion, we're just going to make an abbreviated motion, and then all the details will be contained in the copy of the warrant, which you'll have possession of. Any objection to waiving complete reading of every article? Hearing none, that's the way we will do it. I think that is it. At this time, I would like to ask our Finance Committee member, Ben Markins, who's prepared a brief overview of this year's budget in order to assist us in making the financial decisions we're about to give us a brief overview.
Good morning again, everybody. Ben Martin, Bellis Road. I'm here on behalf of my colleagues, including the two who are missing. We had a very long series of hearings with the municipal employees to talk about each and every line item. Our job as the finance committee is to recommend.
sorry, Ben.
Our job, can you hear me now? Yes, thank you. Our job is to recommend to you, the town, if we agree with the issues that revolve around money. And I can tell you we are unanimous on all of the articles recommending them, including the article on the senior district. So you have a packet, which I hopefully you picked up outside, and I'll just briefly go through it for you. By the way, Lindy wrote a great article in the Ashfield News. If you read that, it talks about most of this stuff. So this first page really is just how much money can the town raise and spend. And the top bit is it starts with last year's number and puts on that 2.5% number that you all probably know about for a 2.5 override. We're not doing one of those. The next bit is about other funds we have. The next part is stuff that we've already approved for debt exclusions and then other sources of cash. So we come up to a possible available of $7,144,000. Of that, the process that we went through came up that we will get to $7,421,000. So we could theoretically have done $23,000 more, but basically we're spending nearly every penny that we're spending, thank you, every penny that we're allowed to spend. So that's page one. Any questions? Any amplifications for my friends? So the second page, you should be happy to see our town financial policies require us to have between 10 and 15% reserves, a rainy day fund, as you will. And what this says is that in 2021, we had a little over 12%. Last year, almost 11%. And this year, we're going to be at 14%. One of our goals is 10 to 15%. You'll also notice on the stabilization line that we're recommending to you that we increase by about $100,000 stabilization from free cash into stabilization. And you might ask why? Well, we think there may be some waves ahead of us, specifically on the school side and other areas. And as Mr. Carter pointed out to us, a simple majority, we can put it into stabilization. It takes a super majority to get it out. So we're going to rely that as a town, we'll decide when to take it out of stabilization. Any questions on that? So here's the budget in total in dollars. And you'll see you'll see the general sections, which also follow the sections in the warrant, and it will tell you which article they are on the left. The fiscal 22 is what we voted last year at this time, and those are in real dollars. And at the bottom, you'll see a tax rate of $17.97. That's the tax rate that we approved. It actually turned out to be less than that when the assessors were done with the evaluations and so on. But in order to get to apples and apples, we're showing you that number. And you'll see for this year, we're proposing $17.95. And you can look at it by line item, and we're happy to discuss it with you. There are some notes to the side. Some of the notable things that we did was we put in extraordinarily, I think, high. We put in raises for town employees of 7.5% to reflect the fact that inflation is up. And our town employees deserve to get paid well, and we don't want folks leaving. It's very expensive for folks to leave. But it'll be up to you ultimately to decide whether you're going to ratify that. If anyone doesn't have questions, I'll move on. I'm actually going to skip the next page and come back to it, because this page here at the end actually takes the same document that you were looking at before and takes the tax rate and breaks it out into its individual components by the warrant article. And just lets you know of our tax rate, for instance, $17.95, over $10 of that is for educating our kids, right? So you have an idea about what proportion all this comes to be. Any questions? And then finally, there's this capital requests line. So we spend a lot of time with our town leaders and employees trying to figure out, measuring both the short term of what our town needs and the long term. So we have a capital asset projection, and you'll see here we're at $349,000 for this current year. We think in order to be sustainable, our town needs to be in the range of 350 or 400,000 every year. And we are looking out every year to see what we need to do next year. And you'll note that, for instance, this year there's 25,000 for a police cruiser. We don't need that cruiser this year, but we're allocating that money so that we have it with the year that we do. You'll remember last year we made an extraordinary investment in the fire department. And we put aside funds for a fire truck. You'll see that we're adding more funds for a fire truck this year, but we're not going to get quite there. We expect to get there between now and next annual town meeting, no later than that. I think that's our promise. And we're having to talk about the individual bits on this, but it was very well thought out, and there were lots of serious conversations about how we should spend your money, and ultimately you'll decide whether that's what we should do or not. And I think that's all I have.
Well, you have a little.
A little bit more. Hello. Is it working?
Yeah.
So tell us, there are recommendations by the Finance Committee for each and every money article in the warrant. And could you tell us about the recommendations that the Finance Committee has decided on?
Oh, I'm sorry, so I thought I had mentioned previously that we are unanimous on every article that involves finance, including the senior services district. We had no dissent at the end of the day. We had lots of conversations with our friends and amongst ourselves, and I won't say it was entirely pleasant, but and basically not contentious, but we did vigorously discuss the issues, and we all came to a unanimous agreement. I can't speak for the select board, but I can speak for our part. We're unanimous on everything.
Vigorous discussion.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you, Finance Committee. So I will not solicit the recommendations for any article, because we just heard that on all the money articles, the Finance Committee recommends them unanimously after a vigorous discussion. So, let's move to Article 2. Is there a motion?
Mr. Moderator,
Mr. Goodgen.
I move the town act on the reports of the town officers.
Second. Mr. Lennox seconds. I do have a question about the, so you all know that the reports are contained in this wonderful Town of Ashfield 2021 annual report. If you open it up to page 1, Mr. Goodgen, there is a dedication there. Could you just tell us who that is and ask them to please stand? No? I can do it. Judy Howe, Tom Crum, thank you so much. You guys are unbelievable citizens. Thank you. So we have a motion to act on the reports of the town officers, to accept them. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes unanimously. Article 3.
Moderator.
Mr. Lannon.
The rain is making most people. Okay. I move that the town vote to authorize the town treasurer to enter into compensating balance agreements for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2020, in accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 44, Section 53, Foxtrot.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Good. Any explanation?
Sure. This article allows our town treasurer to enter into short-term borrowing in the event that there's cash flow shortages from tax revenue, short-term tax flow shortage. We routinely do this when necessary.
Thank you. Discussion? Questions? Comments? Ready to vote? All in favor of the motion as read, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes unanimously. Article 4, do I hear a motion?
Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Carter.
Mr. Moderator, I move that the town vote to authorize the select board to accept and expend any grants and/or gifts that may become available.
Second.
Second by Mr. Atlantic. Anything to add?
It's pretty straightforward. If we get some grant money for a particular use, this gives us authority to employ those funds. It That's what it does. It just gives us the authority.
Okay, ready to vote? All in favor of what it does, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes unanimously. That was seconded by Mr. Mayor. Article 5,
Mr. Moderator,
Mr. Goodgen.
I move that the town vote to authorize the select board to dispose of any unused town-owned equipment and/or property.
Second.
By Mr. Carter, second.
Yeah, so basically this is kind of like the last article, this authorizes the select board to sell off if we have unused equipment, old vehicles, whatever. This authorizes the select board to be able to sell that, get rid of it.
Get rid of it. Discussion. Yes, please state your name and where you live.
Absolutely. Nathaniel Brooks, 305 Main Street. I just have a question, Mr. Moderator. Is this proposal intended to include real property, land?
Mr. Goodman.
It hasn't in the past involved land. Usually it's like if we have an old police cruiser or a loader, like for the highway department or something like that, then we want to get rid of this authorized the select board to be able to sell something like that. Allowances, yeah.
Okay? All right. Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Elwell?
Yeah.
Sure, use the microphone and see if it's on.
Not bad. Hello. I had a question whether
I'm sorry, this is Will Elwell.
Oh, I'm sorry. Will Elwell from Baptist Quarter Road in Ashfield. The article states property, and I wonder if that refers to land, whether that has to be defined. Also, there's no time period or term listed on the article.
Mr. Carter.
Don't mind. It does include property. Ashfield does not owns very little real estate, really. There's really not a lot of property that the town of Ashfield owns. We do have this complex here, the common, the highway garage, and the transfer station. To my knowledge, there are no other small parcels scattered around that the town owns. So as far as us being in the real estate business, that's not what we do. People have, I notice all the time that in other communities, there is property that is given to the town and that sort of thing. We don't have that. It just seems in Ashfield they'd much rather give cash. So we always appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. Mr. Elwell?
And the question of term, length of time of this article?
It's annual. We have this very same article, probably in about the same number every single year. So it's for the year and for the select board.
Thank you, Mr. Elwell. Yes, Mr. Cole.
David Cole, Phillips Road. So regarding the properties, what's the town's ownership of the retaining wall and whether that's relevant to this discussion? The one on Bronson Avenue that's collapsing. Would this authorize the select board to sell its portion or its whatever its easement or whatever it is?
So, excellent question. The retaining wall, most of the retaining wall that isn't affected or isn't owned by the town of Ashfield, or the town of Ashfield outright doesn't have responsibility for the entire length. That a lot of that has to do with the trustees of the field. What it is that the portion that we do have where the old school was, there was a road, a town road that came up along that retaining wall. And that is a portion. I kind of doubt that we're gonna be selling something to give it to some, to sell it to somebody else, that's in such horrible repair. It's a possibility, but the problem is that whole piece of real estate there is so tangled up from the old school being there and the field trust, and there's a small plot of land that the town does own in there. And I guess I'm not sure what the question is, but I would think everybody would be at rest to know that we're not thinking about selling it, that we're more trying to find a way to repair it.
I just want to ask, is there anybody who couldn't hear Mr. Carter because he didn't have a microphone? Okay, good then. Mr. Culp, did you want to follow through with anything? It's good. Further questions on Article 5? Any comments on Article 5? Are we ready to vote on Article 5? Okay, all in favor of Article 5, disposal of surplus property, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstention? That passes unanimously. Now, Article 6, before the motion is made, I anticipate, right, might not be right, that there are a lot of people who want to speak to that. If so, line up at that microphone if you're closest to that microphone, or this microphone if you're in this area, so that we don't have to keep keeping track of who's next, and we'll automatically know who's next to speak. Is there a motion with respect to Article 6?
Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Olanek.
Well, I'm encouraged by the rapid movement the town's made on the first 5 articles, so we'll see how this goes. I move that the town vote to petition the general court to enact a special act for the towns of Ashfield, Buckland, and Shelburne, as written in Article 6.
Is there a second?
Second.
I think that was Mr. Goodwin, right? Okay, please explain what has to be.
Does anybody need an explanation? Are we ready to vote? Okay. There's been a lot of buzz about this particular article, I think, and I hope that people have done their homework and have educated themselves about this article. I think that we publicized it as well as we could have. What this act would do, it would form a legal entity between Ashfield, Buckland, and Shelburne. It would be the Senior Services District. It would take the place of our current consortium agreement with those towns to provide senior services. The reason that we want to do it would establish a legal entity that could receive grant funding, etc., that our current consortium agreement could not do. It does not have anything to do with the act itself. Does not approve the building of any new facilities. The act itself does not approve the addition of any tax monies, etc. It gives each town equal say in how the facility is run, which we don't currently have. All of the budgets, any budget that comes from the Senior Services Director has to be approved unanimously by all 3 towns. If any one town votes down any budget proposal, then it doesn't pass.
I'm sorry, for clarification, by the voters?
By the voters, by town meeting. So it goes through several tranches too before it even gets to town meeting. It would establish a board of managers that's represented by 2 people from each town. 1 person from the Council of Aging and then another person. This board of managers has to approve their operating budget, and they would have to propose any other spending beyond that. At least 1 member from each town on that board of managers would have to vote affirmatively on any budget recommendation before it even came to the town. And then the Finance Committee and the Town Select Board would have to approve it before it came to town meeting. And then ultimately, town meeting would decide whether any budget items would pass at that point. So that's kind of how it's structured in terms of funding. Yeah, I guess we'll start the debate.
Okay, so. Discussion.
John Uraki, Bronson Avenue. I cannot support this article. I do not object to the concept, but as written, I've got a lot of issues with a lot of the details. That's all I have to say.
Do you want to eliminate what any of those problems are, or you just want to leave it where you're done?
I could go on and on.
Well, why don't you go with one on?
In reading the proposed structure, the bylaws, as I understood it, I'm not an attorney, but the bylaws are going to be made by the Board of Managers. And essentially, I didn't see that it had to be a unanimous acceptance. If one person rejected and it's a majority of 5, those bylaws get accepted. And I got a problem with one.
Okay, that's the one.
That's one for now.
Okay, one's enough.
I appreciate the work that's gone into this by the people on the Council on Aging, the Select Board. We tossed it back. The original agreement, the way it was written, and I appreciate you going to bat for that, but I still think there are a lot of details that need to go over in a more, I'm not saying you weren't, open forum. I saw the forum the other night. A lot of questions were raised, but I don't think, we're voting on something that was already written up. So, again, I cannot support this, and I will vote against it.
Thank you, Mr. Rocky. Are you going to be addressing these concerns that are expressed, or who will be? Sorry, you'd be happy to. You want to do it, do you want to make a note of Mr. Naraki's objection, and then you address a number of them, or would you rather do it right now?
Yeah, I'd rather do it one at a time because
Please
I'll
do.
forget what they are before by the time we get to the end.
For those who may not know, just explain what your role was in bringing us to today.
Sure. So my role in this was as part of the working group that was established to look at the language and come up with the structure of this. So there was a working group represented by all 3 towns, select boards, as well as the Senior Center Expansion Committee, which has a very unfortunate name, and our consultant, Dan Plott. And this group was working on trying to come up with this district agreement to provide a way of governing senior services in West County in a more structured way than had been done in the past, or has been done up to now. Regarding John's concern, yes, the bylaws are to be established afterwards by the Board of Managers. And one of the debates that the working group had was, how can we ensure that the district agreement is specific enough to address concerns that were brought to us by all the towns, all different groups. We got a lot of feedback. How can we write this in a way that's specific enough to address those concerns while also being vague enough to allow for us to change bylaws in the future without having to go forth before the state legislature, which any changes to the district agreement would have to go through the state legislature to get amended or changed. So we wanted to maintain as much as that local authority and ability to make adjustments through the bylaws without having to do that. So we tried to address the concerns that were brought to us in the district agreement while allowing for more flexibility by having other things kept to this future set of bylaws that will be created. For my part, my feeling and my role on this was just to try to work with this group and come up with what we felt was the best possible document we could. I haven't come down on it one way or another. Of course, I have my own personal opinion, but I'm not advocating for or against it. My feeling is that, let me know if I'm going beyond.
You are not, this is all relevant.
My feeling on it is that ultimately, if we're happy with how senior services are currently being delivered in the 3 towns, then why would we need this? If we recognize that there are a lot of shortcomings in how senior services are currently being delivered, then perhaps you should vote for it, because we haven't figured out any other method for funding improvements to date. So that's kind of where I am with this.
Just for clarification, does the select board recommend or not recommend this? I'm not talking about as individuals, as a board.
No, the select board is not voting on this as a board.
Thank you.
Making recommendations either way. This is truly for the town to decide.
My name is Evelyn Resch, and I live on Smith Road, and I'm your current chair of your Board of Health. And I just want to tell you that the Board of Health sees this initiative as a step forward to support the health and safety of elders in this community. So I'm speaking to you as your Board of Health chair, but also as someone who's 63 and intends to stay in Ashfield until not alive anymore. And I feel as though this is a public health issue. I think that it's safe to say that through the past 2.5 years, more of us are more aware of what constitutes public health and what falls under the purview of public health, including mental health, including home security in your home, and resources, and that this initiative is a step in the direction of better meeting the needs of elders in this community who intend to stay in this community as long as they possibly can, and hopefully throughout the rest of their lives. So while we are not directly involved in this initiative, we are certainly on the periphery and we're watching it closely. And as somebody who's worked in public health my entire life and who is aging here, I support this initiative.
Thank you. Further discussion?
Rich Amber, Meadow Lane. First, I want to say that I'm totally in favor of revising the agreement, including the agreement when it comes to offering the current and additional services to our seniors. I'm 73. I haven't taken a lot of advantage of the center down in Shelburne, but I would and would like to use it more if we could have more services here in town. By that, I don't mean busing from here to there. I mean services here in town. We're looking at next door probably replacing a fire station before too long. Right now, we know we're in a bind with respect to having to buy trucks that will fit in that station, which costs more money than a normal fire truck. The town does own the land behind this building. It owns the land the fire station sits on. Both of those can be used for construction. The town common, for clarity, cannot. There is an entrance potential off of Norton Hill Road to come in behind this building. And I think we're looking at the long term here in terms of some building that has to go on, which I believe can include not just a senior center, but a community center. The piece of this that concerns me the most appears on page 3 of the 37. It's the second page of this article. It's near the top, in that top paragraph. Because a big piece of this agreement is not stepping in to formalize the services that we now have, including maybe some cost for building buildings and things like that. A big piece of this is the possibility of building a senior center in a town that's a 24-mile round trip from here and takes about 40 minutes. That is an asset to the town, or the village, as they say, of Shelburne Buckland, and is not an asset to the town of Ashfield. It says in this, near the top,
which withdrawal shall become effective 1 year from July 1, provided, however, that such withdrawing the town shall be obligated to pay its annual shares of operational costs and debt costs respectively, as defined in sections 6 and 7 hereof. Now drop down to number 2, here's my problem. In addition, the withdrawn town shall continue to accrue and be obligated to pay its assessed share of principal and interest costs that such town had approved to be incurred by or on behalf of the district for so long as said costs are due and owing. That means if we, in year 2 of this agreement, decide that nothing's going to happen here in the short term, let's throw our towel in down there, and so despite our reservations, build a $800,000 facility. And then 5 years later, we want to do what I talked about earlier. We're on the hook for our share of that investment for the duration of the loan that was taken out to do it.
Thank you, Mr. Chandler. Mr. Atlantic, another thing, either before addressing Mr. Chandler's concerns, could you tell the meeting what is required in terms, there are 3 towns that are going to be considering this at their annual town meeting.
Right.
Tell them what the consequences are if they are not in agreement in terms of what they pass. And then you could also tell them, I think you know, that our town administrator, Mr. McClatchy, is going to, as soon as we're through with Article 6, whatever we do, he's going to communicate that to Buckland's town moderator via a text. And then Buckland will know what we did so they could decide whether to conform their vote to what we did or not. And please tell them what happens in the event that we're not in agreement in terms of what's passed by each meeting.
Okay. So Mr. Chandler's absolutely wanted to correct his interpretation of that section of the district agreement. Thank you, Rick, for attending the public forum that we had on the district agreement. We had a great discussion at that public forum. So if the, and this is a big issue that has been discussed in back channels and a lot of chatter, I think, out in the community about this. I've seen some letters that people have written, etc., discussing this district agreement. And you're absolutely correct. If we have decided to build a building or renovate a building or certainly we decided to take on debt in order to do that, if we were a member of the district at the time that we took on that debt, then the town would be obligated to pay our share of whatever debt that would be until the debt's paid off. So even if we were to withdraw from the district agreement, we'd still be obligated to pay our fair share of that debt until it was paid off. Right now, if something like that were to happen today, according to the district agreement, Ashfield's share of that debt would be roughly 28 to 30% of any borrowing. That's based on an equity formula that is in the district agreement in section 7. It says that that formula is based on overall use of the facility. For Ashfield, that's between 17 and 20% on any given year, and a 5-year rolling basis is what's about right now. Plus an equity formula based on Ashfield's level of income and assessed property values, which brings us up to, like I said, close to the 28 to 30% of our contribution. The concurrent consortium agreement budget, the operating costs, and the operating costs of any district senior services center would remain the same. That formula would remain the same. It's based on that 5-year rolling average use. So the operating budget still uses that same usage formula, but any additional debt would be this different formula. So you're absolutely correct, Rick, and that's something that we would have to decide. Do we want to own 30% of a facility wherever it might happen to be built? That's a question for us to decide.
Okay, and before Ms. Carroll speaks, oh, I'm sorry, are you finished? That's me who's equity.
I guess it's important to reiterate was that we would not enter into any debt that all three towns didn't agree on unanimously.
By a by a meeting.
By a town meeting.
Right.
This cannot be done at special town meeting.
It's an annual town.
For the district agreement, that kind of debt incurrence can only happen at an annual town meeting.
So, we are meeting now. Buckland is meeting today. We put this early in our warrant. Buckland's got it later in their warrant, specifically so that they will know when they entertain it what we did. Because even if there's a comma, a clause that's different, the district, we can't then ask the legislature to approve it unless we all three towns at our annual town meetings, and Shelburne's not until June, agree to the same language for this agreement. And again, Mr. McClatchy will be texting what we did. If we made an amendment, he will text what that is. So the public, they entertained it later this morning, exactly what we approved. Anything else that needs to be understood? I think that's it.
I'm sure there will be something.
Okay, Ms. Carroll.
Carol on Main Street. I've been thinking about this a lot. I'm sorry I didn't get to go to the meeting. My thoughts, just listening to all of this and reading the articles, is that it's very similar to getting ourselves involved with the high school, with the district, and that every year we come here and many of us don't want to vote for the expansion of the budget for the district, but we have to because we all like kids. And in the long run of things, people are going to have to vote for this in some ways because we can't not like old people. And, you know, I know that's a little funny, but I think that there's a reality to it. I mean, I'm going to be 71 this year. My feeling is that I'm not ready to vote for this. Because I think that we could put effort into Ashfield and have anything that we need. But I'm still open to listening. I just think that we're getting ourselves into something that later on down the road we might be sorry for.
Thank you, please.
Yeah, I think that's a sentiment that's been felt and expressed by a number of people, Ricky. We stand here and we say that we don't have to approve anything. We don't have to vote for anything. But when it gets to town meeting floor, how are you really going to vote? How are you going to feel? So I think that's a sentiment that's shared by a lot of people. We're very grateful for a group in town here that put together a survey and worked on surveying Ashfield residents to find out what Ashfield residents wanted. And the results of that survey sort of informed us as a select board that the townspeople in Ashfield thought that they'd be willing to double the amount of spending that we currently make on senior services, but they wouldn't be willing to triple it. So I can't remember what the current assessment is, about 35,000, 36,000 annually. And residents felt as though, maybe not knowing what the number was, felt that they could double it to 70 or so, but wouldn't want to go any higher than that. You know, when we talk about how it affects the budget, how it affects our taxes and all that, our taxes go up by 2.5% every year. And they will go up 2.5% every year. It's just how we decide to budget that money. How the select board, the finance committee, the different departments in town figure out how to dice up that pie and spread it out fairly. Would voting for this increase how much money we spend on senior services? My guess would be ultimately yes, probably, because folks do want to have more, let's say, a day in town where there are in-town services, and that might cost more money. But it sounds like folks would be willing to spend a little bit more. So much like we experienced when we joined the Highland Ambulance District, the amount that we pay for that service is much higher than what we paid before in town. But now the level of service we think is of greater value too. You know, paramedics roll with every call, etc. So, you know, it really just depends on what we as a town want for services.
Thank you. Yes.
Can you hear me? Jody Hall, Smith Road. As I listened to Rick talk about the possibility of the center here, I thought, wow, that's fantastic. I love this idea. But then I thought about the number of people in this town who would be utilizing such a service. I just don't think we have the population density in our area to support something that would provide the kinds of services that older people need, that could be provided by our getting together with a couple of other towns. And as for the travel issue, I mean, honestly, we all shop in other places. I know as people get older, transportation is an issue, but I think it's a fantastic proposal, and I think we should go ahead with it, and I will vote for it.
Thank you, Mrs. Hall.
Carolyn White, Ashfield Mountain Road, here in Ashfield. If we join this as a district, my understanding is it does not keep us from bringing services here through the senior center district, right? That we could have services that are provided in Shelburne, some of them be brought here periodically. Is that true?
Apologize, I was distracted. I didn't hear your question.
So I was asking if there's a lot of services in Shelburne Falls. If we're part of the district, couldn't we bring some of those services here to town periodically, like once a month or every couple of weeks or something like that, so that we're not spending money on a separate facility and structure, infrastructure?
I'm sorry, we could, and that was indicated by the survey as well, that people would like that. And that could happen under the consortium agreement. It could happen now. It's just a matter of working with the senior center director and getting that programming brought where it's accessible by town folks, and being able to pay for it, being able to spend enough money so that we can have those additional services brought to whatever location, whatever town we wanted it to happen. And you know, like I said, we could spend twice as much. We could probably spend more than that to improve senior services. So you could have to use the budget. It's really an operational matter.
Thank you, Ms. White. Before we go on, I failed to mention in the very beginning, this will require a simple majority vote, right? It's 50% plus one for it to pass. We're asking to petition, whether we should petition the legislature to create this district. This is proposed by the select board and is recommended by the finance committee. Mr. Kohler.
Brian Kohler, 168 Daly Road. I'm a bit of a risk taker, and I support this legislation. Where would we be in these hill towns if we didn't have our regional setup with the high school and the middle school right now? As smaller towns, we need to rely on other towns. I can also tell you as a pursuer of grants in this state that you cannot get grants easily unless you can show a regional association. And what this does is this enables the structure of the elderly services such that we can pursue those grants. So everyone wants a free ride, and if you incur debt, you also have an asset. So there's responsibilities with debt.
this isn't about, so much about a funding situation at this point in time. It just sets up a structure. And the seniors have been working a long time and have been in the doldrums of being able to do anything effectively. And this gives them the organizational structure, and I'm going to support this.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. Mr. Field.
Kissing here. Doug Field, 64 Boulder Road. I'm the chair of the Ashfield Council of Aging, and also...
Those are good microphones, please.
Can't you hear me?
No.
Okay. I'm the chair of the Ashfield Council of Aging, and also chair of the Board of Directors of the Senior Center. We've been working with this for over 3 years. And thanks to all of our select board, finance committee people, and the group of people that have been meeting pretty close every month, have come up with this. It's a situation that we at the center feel very strongly on it. And also, we do have things here in Ashfield. And thanks to the Congregational Church now, they have opened up the church so that we can start having our monthly gatherings for the seniors at the church. It's been very hard for the last 2 or 3 years because we haven't. But just for your information, we have 704 people in Ashfield that are seniors out of 1,700. That's a lot of people that we have to serve. And with this virus, there's been an awful lot of people in Ashfield, I don't have the numbers, that have gone down to the senior center to talk to our outreach coordinator. And before the virus, she came up here to Ashfield every month for people to come and talk to her. And right now, if the person cannot make it down to the senior center from Ashfield, she will come up to your home. So it's something that we are looking all the time, we're looking for satellite based maybe. But right now, we gotta support this, and want to support this.
Thank you, Mr. Field. Mr. Chandler, are you?
Anybody else out?
Anybody else? Mr. Carter.
Although the select board hasn't taken a formal vote, I'm going to stand in support of this agreement. There's been a lot of work that has gone into constructing this agreement and trying to figure out a way that the senior services can move forward in a productive way instead of just feeling like we're stuck at the same level in the same place all the time. I think someone can always find a fault. You know, there can be, hell, sometimes I can disagree with myself when I'm sitting alone reading it. And I appreciate that people take the time to really think about it. But as a whole, this is going to give Ashfield, like I say, this agreement is built for Ashfield. Buckland and Shelburne did a lot of things, gave in on a lot of things to make this work for Ashfield. Six people on a board of managers. If two representatives from Ashfield or from Buckland or from Shelburne don't agree with a budget or a proposal or a capital expenditure going forward, it's dead. It has to go back to be revisited. So it has to get past that standard first. We talk about services coming to Ashfield. I think that's fantastic. I think think that's another thing to work towards. The Board of Managers will know and be able to incorporate that into the big decisions going forward on how those things are delivered. I think there's been a lot of hang-up on building a building about, what that would cost and where it would be placed, and Ashfield would own it. If this passes, the district would own it, just the way the district owns the Mohawk Trail Regional School. The town of Buckland does not own the Mohawk Trail Regional School. Any capital expense, it gets past the Board of Managers. It has to come to each select board in 3 different towns to make it on to a annual town meeting warrant, get by the finance committee, and then get by the meeting. If it's a capital thing that incurs debt, that seems to be a huge tripping point. In 3 towns, after getting past the select board and the finance committee and getting to town meeting, a debt would take a majority vote on the floor of town meeting and a supermajority, do I have that backwards? A supermajority vote on the ballot, but it has to go through. So that means there's 6 votes that it has to pass all the way along before it can even be incurred. So it's got to be a pretty good plan to make it past all of you. Seriously. And it's got to be a good plan for everybody. This district agreement will not be the last one the town of Ashfield is asked to join. It may not all happen in my lifetime, but I bet it'll happen in college. There's just no way that our current system of every hill town having its own separate fire department and police department and all of these services are not going to have to be shared. I love Rick Chandler's idea of putting a building up here, and I'm not even worried about the capital expense of doing that, but the reality is having the staff available to be able to run it is what becomes the huge challenge, and we've talked about that in our meetings when we've been hashing this over. I would like everybody, when they think of the debt, to get away from the idea of a building. I'm not saying I'm totally against a building, but I haven't seen a proposal yet that seems to make sense that can be moved forward. But I'm thinking debt could be the Senior Services District spends $500,000 on a senior mobile. Does anybody remember the bookmobile used to come to town, right? That was a big deal, right? If there was a senior mobile that came around in the 3 towns and was able to supply some really good services on a regular schedule, that's what $500,000 could do, right? It could do that, use the staff that we have, and this district agreement, if the Board of Managers and we put the right type of people, I mean, we have to put serious, open-minded, thinking people on the Board of Managers, that this can be just fantastic to actually take care of the needs of the seniors. So, once again, I think this agreement, it may have a few flaws. I think as far as giving the legislature something simple to approve, and then we can have some home rule to take care of the finite details as we find it's time to do it. I really think this is a really good piece of work, and I really appreciate Todd Olenek for having the patience to go to all the meetings to hammer it out.
Thank you.
What else do people do on Wednesday nights?
I'm trying to get over the image. I remember the Oscar Mayer mobile. I'm thinking of a senior mobile that has like wrinkles on the grill. And this article asks whether or not you wish for us to petition the general court. I see that our representative Natalie Blay is there in the back below. Representative Blay, thank you for joining us. Judy Howell.
Judy Howell, Rotten Spruce Corner Road. I am in support of this district agreement with some concerns. I am a retired nurse, and I agree with Evelyn Resch from the Board of Health that we need to take better care of our seniors, and I believe we have the demographics in this town to support this. The COVID pandemic has greatly reduced senior activities that were in Ashfield prior to COVID. We had Tai Chi. We now have a nurse come into the First Congregational Church on a monthly basis to provide services to seniors for blood pressure checks, health advice, etc. And I think those services could be expanded. My concern with this is having any changes, budget agreements, etc., involving 3 towns only at annual town meeting is that we're not going to get anything done. That's my concern about this district agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. So this is one of the issues that we wrote into the district agreement, that it had to come before annual town meeting, so that people who don't trust their select boards, they wouldn't be worried that they try to slide it into a special town meeting where that only 5 people attended and just breeze something through on a senior center budget. They wanted to make sure that everybody in town had an opportunity to vote on it. So that's why annual town meetings vote was included in the district agreement. Yes, it could be a bit of a slow process, but that's the beautiful pace of government, right? We don't want the government doing anything too quickly and too rash with our money. So we want to slow that down and only allow the majority of town to be able to vote on that and not do things too quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Chandler.
So I wore my green rich vest today, and I'm going to be happy to pass that to Kyle when this thing goes through. Somebody's got to play the role of watchman on the finances on this thing, and that's all I'm concerned about. If it hadn't been conflated with construction, I wouldn't have an issue with this, and I want to spend more money. I think I've been on record in the past of saying, why don't we double, which was the popular numbers, for more for services? I like the plus idea. But I am afraid, based on the past 3 years being all about almost nothing except build a building, where's it going to be? How much will it cost to renovate the Buffalo Police Station? Where can we build a brand new one someplace? So if I'm becoming convinced, but if I really were convinced that this was not about building a building, I'd be 100% in favor of it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Can I address that?
Please do.
So, I don't want to spend any more money on it, right? My hope and my expectation is that if we enacted this district agreement, we'd be able to get outside funding to help with whatever projects the expansion committee, might come up with. Frankly, the town of Ashfield, the town of Buckland, and the town of Shelburne, they're not going to want to spend more money. We don't have more money to spend. It has to be outside money. And right now, the way it's structured, we can't get outside money. So, unlike, feeling like I would have to vote yes for school budgets, I don't think that I would have to feel like I had to vote yes for senior center budgets. And as a matter of fact, I don't think any budget that expended a tremendous amount of town money would get past the Finance Committee and the Select Board. Of course, we're not going to be on the board forever, but hopefully that sentiment would flow into the future.
Thank you. Mr. Culp.
David Culp, Phillips Road. I'm rising in support of this agreement. I think it's well thought out. I think it's necessary. Our current structure is insufficient. This provides governance that we didn't have before. There's plenty of checks and balances to make sure that we don't spend money that we don't want to be spending. There's a significant need, and it also provides the framework for getting grant funding, as Todd mentioned, or taking on debt to build new structures or renovating structures. And I think, let's just be frank, that while some of us have been saying this is not about a building, this does create a framework for capital expenses that I think many of us agree are needed, that there are needs. And I think this is a reasonable agreement, framework to take on that debt. I think it's totally reasonable for us to take on debt even if we leave the district, because that's a decision that, we took on the debt, and we understood that that would be debt that we would have to pay until the end of the terms of that debt, and it wouldn't be fair to leave the agreement, leave the district and not have to pay. So that all just seems reasonable and fair to me. My one concern about this actually is that I want the district to be able to make capital expenses, to take on debt under certain circumstances, to build buildings as the needs arise. And I'm just worried that Section 7, which is the formula for how that debt is spread among the towns, while it's very fair and equitable for an abstract project, I don't think it provides the flexibility for specific projects that might arise that we can't exactly anticipate. So what I'm getting at is I'm tempted to want to propose an amendment to Section 7 to strike that formula, and the reason is that you can imagine a number of different scenarios where capital expenses might occur. Suppose we had an opportunity to build a community center, an emergency management center here in Ashfield. Well, the people in Buckland and Shelburne may not want to contribute as much to it because it brings more to us. In that case, maybe for that particular debt, we would want to choose for Ashfield to pay a greater share of that. Similarly, if there was a building in Shelburne Falls, maybe we would want the formula to be biased more on usage and less on property value for that particular project. So I think this is a very good agreement, but I'm tempted to suggest that we modify Section 7 because it would give us the flexibility in the future when capital projects are very warranted and reasonable, that we would have more flexibility to actually get those passed, because at that time, amongst the towns, we could agree on how we were going to collectively pay for it. So I might rise again to make an amendment depending on continued discussion.
Thank you for that. As we all know, if you rise to make an amendment, you don't make your comments first and then amend. You make your amendment and then explain why. But any amendment would have to be in writing, both for our record and also for clarity, so we know what we're voting for. So thank you, Mr. Cole.
Yeah, Mr. Moderator. Mr. Moderator.
Yeah,
Section 7 was probably one of the most debated parts of the district agreement amongst the working group and also in the public forums that we conducted. It was placed in there because there were some towns, or maybe a town, I can't remember specifically, that really wanted to have a very clear description of how debt would be structured if it were to be incurred. There were other towns who didn't want that section in there at all and wanted it to be placed into the bylaws so that we would have more flexibility in how we created that, how that was all handled. And like I said, this is probably the most debated, most contentious part of the whole thing. And ultimately, we had a pre-select board meeting back in March, and we talked about this, and ultimately, we sort of said, okay, we'll leave it in and see what happens. So it'll be interesting to see whether we decide to amend and take it out, or we leave it in.
So yes, if there are any amendments, we will communicate that to Buckland. Shelburne isn't having its annual until June. But Buckland this afternoon will know that we've made such an amendment. They can either conform to what we decided or not. If the three towns don't vote on exactly the same language, we put off till next annual town meeting for all three towns. Yeah, Ms. Coleman.
I'm Bonnie Coleman, Conway Road. I just have a question. Does the board have an idea of how many people from Ashfield are presently using the senior center? Because I'm 71 and I've never been.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the exact numbers. I know the percentage.
Is there someone here who can answer your question?
The percentage is about 20% of usage. Yes, so that's I don't know what that number represents as far as how many actual people, what the individual users are. Yeah, Doug.
It looks like Mr. Field might have a number. Do you have a number?
It's 20% of the population at this moment.
So we have about 700 seniors here in Ashfield. 20% of 700 is about 140 people.
So we're not asking what the percentage of people in Ashfield use it. We're asking how many people that are from Ashfield, not as a percentage, use the senior center services.
As seniors.
Right.
We right here,
Somebody knows that number, we don't.
we don't have that number either.
Right.
We've never been asked before, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I've heard it. 90. It's in the book. Town report. It's in your town report. So if you want to refer to your town report, what page is it on?
It's on page 114, Lindole West Road. In 2021, a total of 99 residents ages 60 plus from Ashfield utilized services at the center 2,319 times.
So, Lynn,
I just want to point out, I read that, but at my age I forgot.
and we have 700 seniors in town, so 99 or 100 seniors is what? Never mind. 12%? 14%. You've always, in any leadership position, you always have to rely on people smarter than you. Surround yourself with people that are smarter than you, and that's what I strive to do at all times. Thank you.
And then don't forget to take credit for what they did.
Well, that comes later.
Okay, Mr. Markins, are you speaking as an individual on behalf of the finance committee?
Yes, I came here because I don't want to speak on behalf of the finance committee, but my experience as a finance committee member is since Dallas Road, by the way. When this came to us last year, at the risk of sounding like Tom Carter, I had two responses: no and hell no. And I have to credit Mr. O'Lanion and the select board who went back and really dug in. And I think, if anything, this agreement may be too tough to be able to get stuff done. We're requiring too much unanimity between three towns. But I think it's a really good start, and I'm going to be in favor of it.
Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, I want to reiterate that I'm not an advocate for or against. I'm simply a servant of the town. I just brought a product forward. That's it.
So this is Evelyn Resch again from Smith Road, Chair of the Board of Health and 63-year-old older adult. One of the things that I wanted to piggyback on was what Judy had said, which is about the nurse services that have been brought monthly. Now, that came about because of efforts on the Board of Health and the fact that we are now members of FERCOG and are able to utilize that district advantage, right? So I also am a nurse practitioner, This is an important initiative for me. It has been utilized really nicely. People are very happy about it. There is no proposal that will be perfect. We all know this. My concern is that if we continue in what I consider to be flypaper conversation, where every time you take a step, you get trapped in something, all of you who are here, who are 60 and older, will not see any improvement in your senior services because you're going to be waiting so long for some unanimous vote about what's going to be great. Okay, everybody will always have a complaint about something. But just keep in mind that expansion and advancement has been already made by our joining FERCog, which was a Board of Health decision with the support of the Select Board, so that we could get more services here in Ashfield. Trust me, I don't really like to drive. Most people who know me see me walking all over town. I want to be able to walk up and get services. I want that for everybody else that's here, who's older, or to just drive 4 miles. And there is a very large initiative that's being spearheaded by the World Health Organization, which all of you may say, well, what does that have to do with us? Well, WHO is distilling this initiative to help rural communities keep people aging in place. And this is part of what we're connecting with FERCog also, and we're getting support for it. We have a lot of plans to the Board of Health to expand this, and I cannot encourage you enough to take this next step because at least it's something. If we don't do anything, if we block it again, you're unlikely to see anything as an elder person that's really much more expanded because there's only so much that we as the Board of Health can do for you.
Thank you, Madam Director. Mr. Kohler, second time. Oh, Ms. Carroll, second time.
This might seem silly. However, I've heard a lot of people say services and we'll get services and senior services. I would just like from somebody to have a definition of senior services because I don't really understand what that is.
Thank you, Mr. Kohler, second time.
Ron Kohler, Bailey Road. I don't like to, we've heard a lot of debate and we could go on for another 3 hours, but I'd like to call the question.
Okay, by calling the question, he wants to cut off debate. This requires a 2/3 supermajority of the meeting, and it's non-debatable and non-amendable. All those in favor of Mr. Kohler's motion to call the question and cut off discussion and go right to a vote, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say nay. Nay. All right, now you have authorized me, I'm sorry, abstentions.
Stay.
1. You have authorized me in the past to use my judgment about whether 2/3 has been reached. We have a bylaw that says that I can make that judgment. I don't want to make that judgment on something as important as this. If there's anybody who disagrees with me, then we will have a count, right? And we'll go through the process of having our tellers counted. So, I think that we have a 2/3 majority based on the voice vote that I just heard. Is there any member of the meeting who disagrees with my assessment? Okay, question has been called. We're going to go right to the vote.
Mr. Moderator.
Yes, Mr. Lennon. Point of order?
Point of order. I'd move that this be a paper ballot vote.
Okay, so the method of voting, there's a motion to do it by paper ballot, which is also called secret ballot, so no one knows how you voted. Is there a second to Mr. Lennox's motion for paper ballot? Mr. Kohler to the second. So, what that means is instead of just having a voice vote, as we've been doing so far this morning, we would have the town clerk orchestrate, what's the right word, execute a paper ballot. All those in favor of a paper ballot instead of a voice vote, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say nay. No. Any abstentions? Okay, motion fails, Mr. Lennon. So we're going to do it by a voice vote. If we're unclear about how we voted, this is a simple majority required on Article 6. So, all those in favor of petitioning the general court to enact a special act for the towns of Ashfield, Buckland, and Shelburne, establishing the West County Senior Services District, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say nay. Nay. Any abstentions? I saw it passes by a majority. Does anybody disagree with that? The motion passes. Our town administrator is notifying Buckland of what we just did so that they know that we passed it in its entirety, and we'll see what Buckland does this afternoon. Thank you for a really good discussion. Article 7, is Mr. Lilly here? Greg Lilly? I'm sorry. This is
Margaret here.
Yes, Mr. Lilly.
Greg.
Thank you.
You don't hear me? Good. All right, now that we're done with all that old people stuff, let's work on the kids. I move that the town vote to raise and appropriate and transfer from available funds the following sums to fund educational expenses for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2022. School committee stipends, $1,000. Mohawk Trail Regional School District regional school expense, $2,444,300. Mohawk Trail Regional School District capital expense, $14,546, and vocational education expense, $350,000, totaling $2,809,846.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. This has been recommended by our finance committee. So, Mr. Lilly, would you like to address this and any explanation you would like to give us about this article?
And if you have any specific questions, our local superintendent, Charles Ted, and Mr. Rogers, and also.
I think everyone knows Mr. Lilly is our school committee representative, along with Mrs. Martin, Jen Martin, and our superintendent, Charles Stanton, is with us to answer any questions we have.
Greg Lilly, Buckle Road. We gotta get that out of the way. Essentially for the town of Ashfield, there's not a whole lot of change compared to last year. In fact, our assessments have gone down. While that's happening, our minimum contributions have gone up a little bit. That's really out of our control. That's what we know.
Mr. Lilly, can you put the mic a little, there's a bunch of old people here. Put the mic closer to your head.
Sorry, I forgot. In this budget, it's, we've had, we know that what the pandemic's been, but within that, we've been given a lot of one-time resources to help sustain our districts through the CARES Act and ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3 grants. We are currently using those to not necessarily use for new programming, but to just cover a lot of expenses that go along with the school district. As far as the total budget goes, it's up 2.9%. We used a lot of funds to keep our assessments down from our revolving funds, probably more than we would have liked to, but as I'm sure a lot of you read the newspapers, we did come to a final 2D agreement with the Hall School District. And in doing so, we'll be getting some more revenue from that, which we would like to put back in to help fill back up our revolving funds for next year. We understand that our model as currently is not the sustainable model. Numbers aren't what they used to be. We are currently working on many avenues to try to attract school choice students and also try to keep our students in district that we already have. There's a lot of work that goes into this, as I'm sure a lot of you know. When it comes to schooling, no one's ever going to be 100% happy and never going to make everybody happy. That's just the reality of the situation. Are there any specific questions regarding this budget? I know there are some changes that I'm sure Cheryl can speak to better than I can. But as far as Ashfield goes, I know, at least with capital expenses, it's kind of not here for us capital-wise next year. As you all remember, last year we brought up all the capital expenses for bringing our facilities up to snuff. Those will be hitting us in FY 24, right? 4, yes. So that'll be next year. But as far as this year goes, our numbers are actually down a little bit. So.
Thank you. This is recommended by the Finance Committee. So, questions, comments? Superintendent's here if you'd like to ask her anything or make any comments. Are we ready to vote? Seems like we are. All those in favor of Article 7, school expenses, as moved by Mr. Lilly, say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
No.
Any abstentions? It passes by a majority vote. All right, thank you. Now, in your warrant, you will see Article 8. And for Article 8 is incomplete. There are another two portions of Article 8 dealing with the agreement. Could have been two separate articles in addition to the one which is appearing here. Plus a borrowing article never made it to our warrant. We cannot, because of open meeting, because of your right to know what we're going to entertain, therefore this is an incomplete article and I think we should pass over it. Now, I have two ways of doing that. Number one, I can just decide that and we'll bring it up at a special town meeting before the end of the fiscal year, June 30th. And so we'll have another special town meeting where we'll entertain what's in your warrant as Article 8, plus an additional 3 articles, which we can't entertain today. Or I can bring it to you and ask you, is there a motion to postpone indefinitely, because we don't have a date certain for that special town meeting yet. Is there anybody who objects to me using the discretion, which I have as a matter of law, and just passing over it for today? Anybody want to have the meeting vote on whether to pass over it? Seeing no hands, we'll pass over Article 8 for now. We'll move to Article 9. Is there a motion?
Mr. Moderator,
Mr. Lanning.
I move that the town vote to set the stipends and compensation for all elected officials of the town, including the moderator, Board of Assessors, Board of Health, Constables, Select Board, School Committee, and Tree Warden, as provided by Mass General Law, Chapter 41, Section 108, to be made effective as of July 1st, 2022, as provided for in Article 9, and as contained within the budget.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Carter. Anything to add to what we see here?
Just that there are no changes in the proposed stipends for any of these elected officials. They're the same as they have been for a number of years.
Who wants to amend by adding multiple zeros to the moderators? Nobody. I guess that says it. Any further discussion, comments? Ready to vote? All in favor of Article 9 as moved by Mr. Atlantic, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That makes it unanimous. Thank you. Article 10, is there a motion?
Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Carter.
Mr. Moderator, I move that the town raise and appropriate the sums as written in Article 10 to fund general government expenses for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2022.
Thank you. Is there a second? Is there a second?
Second. Second.
Who seconded it? Mr. Markey for the minutes. Thank you, Mr. Markey. Explanation, please, Mr. Carter.
We've got the playing cards up here, so we get distracted. So this is all the general government expenses, including the stipends that we just got authorized for the last article to put in. This actually raises and appropriates that money. The things that are of particular note here, the employee raises, as Mr. Markin had discussed earlier, what we have budgeted in is a 7.5% cost of living adjustment. Due to inflation, it's pretty easy to know if you're out in the world that costs are increasing tremendously. I mean, I just about fell over when I saw gas at $4.35 in Williamsburg this morning. And so we want to reward the employees to not just keep up with the cost of living, but hopefully get them in a position where they know that they're being appreciated. We're hoping that this 7.5% will do that. Generally speaking, the expenses are really pretty level funded outside of that. Once in a while, if you really study this article, you'll see that one's down $7,000 and the other one's up $7,000. That's really just to keep all of you confused. No, it's just that we're taking some of those expenses and putting them into the account that they really deserve to be in. That's about it. I mean, we'll answer any questions.
Again, this is recommended by our Finance Committee. Questions, comments? Yes, please.
Mr. Moderator, I'm hoping that...
I'm sorry, can you give us your name?
I'm sorry, I forgot. Nathaniel Brooks, 305 Main Street.
Thank you.
I'm hoping the Finance Committee of the Select Board can clarify how we can tie out the Article 10 budget detail in the warrant to the budget summary handout shared with the council.
Is it clear what's being asked here? Am I missing something?
We'll find out. If you want to.
Sir. Okay, Mr. Marcus is saying he will try to get the answer for your question. He'll do the math. In the meantime, we'll entertain other questions and comments. So, other questions and comments? Yes, please, quickly.
Very quickly, here we go. The town common maintenance has been about 2,500 in previous years, and it's 9,700. I wonder if someone would speak to that.
Here's another one, just to keep everybody confused, so they ask some questions. Town common expense, mowing the town common, the amount of upkeep we do on that. Into that, in the past, we were very, very fortunate that we had a fire chief that took it upon himself to do a lot of the snow plowing adjacent to the town common, the town hall, fire department, and that's, we have to pay for that now, plus some other snow removal and that sort of thing. We popped it into that account instead of making yet another account. So town common expense is probably not properly addressed at this time, but it's really the additional cost of paying these exterior expenses that go with this building as far as snow removal and that sort of thing.
Mr. Martin. Oh, Ms. Quigley, is that, you okay? And by the way, before Mr. Martin answers the previous question, that would be Del Haskins who did all that work voluntarily. Thank you, Chief. Mr. Markins.
So first, thank you to the gentleman who actually looked at all of this stuff and found out that there's a $3,000 difference. And we sort of, it's one of those things where Tom said we tried to confuse you. It confused us a little bit. By past practice, for general government expense, for some reason, we take $3,000 out of free cash and put it there. And I think it predates Tom. So we're talking like when the budget was in black and white, not color. So the difference is $3,000 that came out of free cash. And maybe we won't do that anymore. But it's legit.
Does that satisfactorily address your question? Thank you for the question.
We'll be voting on that in a few more, that $3,000. It's not like we're saving.
Further questions or comments with respect to Article 10? Ready to vote? Sounds like we are. All those in favor of Article 10, General Government Expenses as moved, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes unanimously. Article 11, please. Motion?
Mr. Moderator,
Mr. Goodgen.
I move the town vote to raise and appropriate the sums written in Article 11 to fund public safety expenses for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2022.
Is there a second?
Second.
I'm sorry, who seconded it? Mr. O'Leary. Thank you. Explanation, please.
Yeah, so basically we had, like Tom mentioned in the last article, we had wage increases this year, and that was across the board 7.5%. We got to make up for the current inflation conditions, so that was an increase. Police wages have also increased a little bit to help provide more community-related involvement, such as a sweet treats program that they've been doing, which is basically kind of connected, going back to what we were just talking about with some of the senior services, basically checking in on people. Also, the fire department wages have increased to allow for more volunteer members and to provide payment for during daytime training in which members have to take time off. And again, this has to do with our changes in the fire department since last year, having a new chief and just trying to get new people involved and keep our training best we can.
Comments, questions, discussion? None? Ready to vote on Article 11? All those in favor of Article 11 as moved, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Nay? Abstentions? Article 11 passes unanimously. Article 12, is there a motion?
Mr. Moderator,
Mr. Land.
I move that the town vote to raise and appropriate the sums as written in Article 12 to fund public works expenses for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2022.
Second.
Second by Mr. Carter. Explanation, please.
Sure. Like all the other departments, this reflects the wage increase. It also reflects increased highway expenses having to do with fuel. Everybody knows the cost of fuel's gone up. Transfer station expenses are up. We hope to add a second attendant at the transfer station for a limited number of hours, not the entire time, but to assist down there. And those are the major things.
Discussion? Yes, Mr. Hall.
Second.
Oh, you seconded it? Oh, I didn't get a second. Thank you. Discussion? Yes, Mr. Chandler.
Rich Chandler, just a streetlights line. Last year's town report talked about conversion to LED lights. Is that part of this, or where do we stand on that?
You're going to hear this question?
Mr. Chandler.
The question about the conversion of the streetlights to LED lights that has been mentioned a few times, is this number based on that, or is that not yet happening, or where are we on that?
Great memory. The street lights, we had so much to tackle in this budget for this meeting that we did not even take that up. We're hoping to see where we come out financially after this meeting into the next fiscal year. If I remember that correctly, which I'm pretty sure I do, we have to purchase the street lights we have now, and then we can get a grant to put in the LEDs. Great idea. I don't believe that we have any problem with it. It's just maybe we were chasing too many cats on this budget to narrow down on that. So.
Thank you. Good observation, Mr. Chandler. Other questions, comments? Ready to vote? All those in favor of Article 12 as moved, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes unanimously. Article 13, is there a motion? Mr. Carter.
Mr. Moderator.
Please.
I move that the town vote to raise and appropriate the sums as written in Article 13 to fund health and human service expenses for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2022.
Second. Second by Mr. Olanek. Please explain anything you'd like to.
Yeah, this is, if you're comparing year to year, this is pretty much copy and paste, except the senior center has, which is fairly standard. Just like most of our expenses, there are some increases in that line, but for the most part, this is nothing exceptional that's been changed in this from year to year.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. Discussion. Ready to vote? All those in favor of Article 13 as read, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? That passes unanimously. Article 14.
Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Goodrin?
I move the town vote to raise and appropriate the sums as written in Article 14 to fund cultural and recreational expenses for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2022.
Second.
Second.
Mr. Alanik. Yes, please. Mr. Goodrin.
So this year the library's budget has been split out into wages and operations, but still represents an increase in support and public spending. The park sees an increase to help with maintenance and to cover increases in lifeguard pay, which must be competitive with state lifeguard rates. Also, we did get rid of the Lake Dam maintenance to zero this year because we have another big line this year as far as Lake Dam maintenance goes, where the dam is actually going to be rebuilt, and that's what's going to be happening during this season. So we don't actually need to follow up with that. I think that pretty much does it, yeah.
Thank you. Discussion. Questions coming? Yes, please.
Comment on the library?
Please.
Nancy Hall, Main Street or Spruce Corner Road, wherever you find me. I want to take this moment to just say how awesome our library is, how awesome the new librarian is, and all the people who work there. They did an incredible job through the pandemic, serving people outside when it opened up. It is such a wonderful place. It is a beautiful building, something this town can be proud of. The interior has been redone. If you haven't been in lately, you owe a visit. It's just a humming place and serves so many. I'm always impressed with how many families. There's little people. I had a customer, Jack, yesterday. Jack is not yet 2, but his vocabulary is pretty big, and he loves that library. He was almost taking the library over the hardware store. I mean, So anyway, the families and children love the library, and they are welcome there. I also want to take this moment to commend Marcine because her service is one of the things that got us to this place.
I also think the library has the best contributing neighbors in the hardware store and the Carters. I once thanked Tom Carter for all that he does for the library. He and Sandy, a trustee, who just have done so much. And Tom said, no, I do stuff for them. They let me take out books for free. I said it was a trade. Thank you for that. Yes, Ms. Martin.
Yes, I'd just like to also recognize my colleague. Oh, I'm sorry.
We need to amplify.
I'd also like to recognize Jenny Markins, 597 Bellis Road, and I'm also on the school committee. And I'd just like to recognize my colleague Greg because his business, Hilltown Tents, has contributed so much during COVID to just about every aspect of our ability to function. And I remember in front of the library there was a lovely awning where people could meet. So thank you, Greg.
Well, that was pretty real good. Love that. Any other comments or questions? Yes, Ms. Link.
Mary Link, 48 Buckland Road. I just have a question about the invasive species removal, which we've paid a lot more for in the past, and I assume that there's some relation between that and fixing the dam, why it's so low, but it'd be great to have an explanation.
Mr. Lynn? Yeah, you're absolutely right, Mary. The reason why that line item is so low is because as part of the Lake Dam reconstruction project that's happening this construction season, kickoff is happening very soon, within a couple of weeks, when they're actually going to start work on the dam. The water level of the dam is going to have to be reduced by at least 3 feet. So in effect, it's a drawdown happening because of the construction. And so we're going to forego any work other than that on invasive species control this year and reassess later.
Thank you. Further questions or comments on Article 14? Ready to vote? All those in favor of Article 14 as moved, say aye. Aye. Any in opposition, say nay. I don't think I've heard anybody. And abstentions. That passes unanimously. Let me just pause just to say, my plan is to go, for those of you who have been here, we convened a special town meeting at 9:30, so some of you have been here since 9:30. My plan is to go to 12:30 and ask you when you want to break. So that's what the plan is. We'll go for at least another half hour and then we'll see what you feel. So, Article 15, is there a motion?
Mr. Moderator?
Mr. Olan?
Yes, I move that the town vote to raise and appropriate the sums as written in Article 15 to fund debt service expenses for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2022.
Second?
Second.
Mr. Carter? Please explain.
Sure, these are past loans that we've taken out. This is the amount of money that we need to pay back for this fiscal year. Fortunately, the transfer station debt will be paid off this year. Highway garage, not so much. I can't remember what year that finally. 2054. Yeah, it's way out.
This is the second year we're paying more principal than interest.
Yay.
So it's been a while. But yeah, this is the debt from past loans that we've taken out.
Thank you very much. Discussion. Remember, this is recommended by your Finance Committee, our Finance Committee. Any comments, questions? All those in favor of Article 15 as moved, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes unanimously. Thank you. Article 16, is there a motion?
Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Carter.
Mr. Moderator, I move that the town vote to raise and appropriate the sums as written in Article 16 to fund ambulance services for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2022. Second.
And that was seconded by Mr. Goodgen. Is that right?
Yep.
Thank you. Mr. Carter?
Pretty self-explanatory. The ambulance service, Highland Ambulance, they're very conscientious about keeping costs down. They're increasing wages, as everybody does, to try to retain personnel. They're hoping to get a training program offered through GCC in order to hopefully get some classes going locally. As far as anything that's come to the board, we have heard nothing, no negative remarks about the service. We're very fortunate to have it, and hope we can make it. We really need, for the 7 communities that are involved, we really need to find everything we can do to keep it sustainable.
Thank you. Questions, comments? All those in favor of Article 16 as moved, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Article 16 passes unanimously. Article 17, is there a motion?
Mr. Moderator,
Mr. Goodwin.
I move that the town vote to raise and appropriate the sums as written in Article 17 to fund benefits for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2022.
Second by Mr. Aladdin. Please explain.
Yeah, so this article just deals with all the benefits for employees in town. So health insurance premiums remain the same for this fiscal 23. Due to a lack of claims, unemployment insurance has been reduced. The regional retirement assessment that the town has no control over is what it is. And the board wants to keep funding what we can towards the post-employment benefits trust fund. So we have $2,000 in there. And the name of Tom Carter. So that's it.
That's it. Questions, comments?
Mr. Moderator?
Mr. Carter.
I certainly support this article, but I do have to go on the record as saying that I think the OPEB, the other post-employment benefits line item for any municipality is just the most ridiculous expense line in the entire budget. Why? Because it's asking you to put money forward for something that you will never catch up with and that you're paying anyway. And if you put $50,000 in there a year, for 5 years, you would still end up being just shy, that you would still have to pay. It never really truly becomes self-sustaining. And I just think that the accounting that we're asked to do to try to fund this it's just taking taxpayer money that they're going to expend in the future anyway, and taking it, if we were in a really tight budget situation, this would be ridiculous in my mind. It really would be. Unfortunately, we're running the town so we can at least scatter a little money in there. I mean, by rights, if you were really going to pay attention to what they say, somebody's going to run you in. You always wonder who's making these damn rules. But if we were in a really tight situation, it would be something. And if we were put $25,000, if we had to choose between $25,000 for OPEB or $25,000 to make sure the roads are salted and sanded in the winter, I think most of us would know where we needed to go with that.
But how do you feel about it, Mr. Carter? Thank you. Other questions or comments about OPEB or anything else?
I don't suck.
You ready to vote? All those in favor of Article 17 as moved, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? It passes unanimously. Thank you. Article 18, do I hear a motion?
Mr. Moderator?
Yes, Mr. Alanis.
I move that the town vote to raise and appropriate the sums as written in Article 18 to fund intergovernmental assessments for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2022.
Second.
Thank you. Please explain.
Yes, these assessments are for our FERCOG membership. So I think most folks know that we belong to FERCOG. That's the core assessment. We also receive our accountant services from there, software maintenance services, procurement services, radio maintenance for our fire and police, our inspection program for building permits and zoning enforcement, etc. The community health program line, as Evelyn mentioned, we are taking our services from FERCOG now, and so the amount that we previously had budgeted with our Board of Health, we shifted over into the FERCOG assessment budget.
I see, thank you. Discussion. Questions, comments? Ready to vote? DDR, Article 18. All those in favor of intergovernmental expenses motion as moved, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes unanimously. Article 19. Ms. Hoff.
Nancy Hoff, Spruce Corner Road. I move that the town vote to appropriate $180,164 for sewer wastewater treatment plant enterprise fund expenses by appropriating $160,164 from the departmental receipts and appropriating $20,000 from our retained earnings in the fund to defray the sewer and wastewater treatment plant enterprise costs and expenses as written in Article 19.
Second.
Thank you. We have our stabilization fund, or whatever you want to call it, and it's fairly large now. Those of us who paid into the sewer, costs have been going up to reflect increased costs, most of which they hurt. But I'm glad to say, glad to say that it has mostly gone to employees. So, since our stabilization enterprise fund was flush at close to $175,000, we thought that this year $20,000 to offset costs as a way of helping defray the bill you receive. So that's the explanation there. I also want to take this opportunity to say that for years I've gotten up here and said that on the horizon we will probably have it's working if I shake it. So, the plant is now over 25 years old, and there is money out there for water and sewer infrastructure things. So, just to prepare you that this is probably close on the horizon now. Close on the horizon that we will make some major changes at the plant, that the greenhouse is not needed, it does not function as a solar aquatic plant, and the greenhouse incurs expenses. My personal vision is maybe a building that may have a roof that would have solar panels on it and then defray our electrical expense. So this is what we wastewater people are talking about over this year. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to all the wastewater people.
We're great.
You're fantastic, thank you. And it takes a hardware store owner to figure out how to make the microphone work. So, questions, comments about sewer? None? Ready to vote? All those in favor of Article 19 as moved by our sewer commissioners, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Passes unanimously. Article 20.
Mr. Moderator.
I'm sorry, let's do that. We're ready.
Ready? All right. I move the town vote to appropriate $1,367,435 for broadband enterprise fund expenses by appropriating $765,960 from fund received fees, transfer $325,626 from anticipated grant funds, and appropriate $275,299 from retained earnings in the fund to defray broadband expense costs and expenses as written in Article 20 to fund the broadband enterprise fund for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2022.
Second. Take a deep breath. Who seconded that? Here we go, Tom. Thank you. Okay, please.
Yeah, so broadband, so obviously we have our broadband up and going. The fund seems to be pretty well managed at this point, and business model is working out for us. The town is expecting to receive approximately $325,000 from a federal grant, and then we will continue to receive around $100,000 or so a year for about the next 6 years, so it's going to help defray costs going forward. This year's budget provides for the town to make a payment of over $750,000 towards the $2.2 million in remaining debt, which is financed entirely through subscriber fees and the grant funding we were talking about earlier. and not through taxation. So it's been really successful. I think we owe a lot of that to credit to this to David Culp for helping us, you know. It's sustainable, you know, as quickly as we could have hoped for, and it's going to pay for itself. So
it is great. Thank you. Discussion. Comments or questions? All those in favor of Article 20 as moved by Mr. Gucci, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes unanimously. Again, thank you, Mr. Cole. I'll email you a thank you, Mr. Cole. Article 21, is there a motion?
Mr. Moderator,
Mr. O'Lantern.
I move that the town vote to transfer and appropriate the sum of $311,652.82 from the last mile broadband fund to pay down broadband-related debt.
Second.
Mr. Carter seconds. Please explain.
So this amount is what we have left from the loan we took out towards building broadband. It's still sitting in our account, so we want to use that money to pay down the debt, since that we're not using it to construct anything. We want to pay it back. And you know, this is kind of exciting because as a town, as a board, we didn't really know how it was going to work out for sure. We had high hopes, and it looks like we're going to be able to pay off this system. We were hoping for 10 years, you know. We're going to be able to pay off this system, we think, if nothing changes, in half that time. So it's been a fantastic result. We're very thrilled with it.
Thank you. Comments, questions? Ready to vote? All those in favor of Article 21, broadband debt payment as moved, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you all. Article 22, is there a motion?
Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Carter.
Mr. Moderator, I move that the town vote to transfer from the Dog License and Control Fund the following sums to fund dog officer expenses for fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2022. $3,845 for animal control officer stipend and $2,500 for animal control expenses for a total of $6,345. Second.
Thank you. Second by Mr. O'Lantern. Anything to add to what you just moved?
Should be pretty self-explanatory.
Okay. Questions, comments? You ready to vote? All those in favor of dog officer expenses as moved, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Also unanimous. Article 23.
Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Chair.
I move the town vote to raise and appropriate the sums as written in Article 23 to fund capital expenditures for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2022.
Second.
Mr. Parker seconds. Please explain.
All right, so the first is highway bridge work. So we're always trying to put money aside because there's just ongoing, just constant every year. So we're always putting money towards bridge repairs, which are ridiculously expensive. And this also gives us a pot of money to pull from if we do have to, that we can use to match grant funding that we might get from the state at different times. Next line is the police cruiser. So as part of our capital plan, we have certain replacement intervals for different, vehicles and equipment that we have in town. And so we're starting to put together some money for the replacement of our second cruiser for fiscal year 2024. The bathhouse at the lake is in desperate need of a roof replacement, so we're putting money up for that. And the last is a 13-year-old highway truck that's having mechanical issues and safety issues, and so we're putting up money to replace that vehicle. So We know the highway department, obviously does a lot of work to keep the roads clean and in good shape, and that takes a toll on vehicles. So.
Thank you, Mr. Goodgen. Questions, comments? Yes, Ms. Allen.
Judy Hopkins, Spruce Corner Road, as park chair. I would like to have a further discussion about the bathhouse repair. Kyle has been after us for 5 years to get the roof repaired. And in preparation to do so, we, in paying attention to the park survey that was done earlier this year, we decided to roll in improvements to the sinks and faucet structure inside and go for a park grant, including the roof. However, the park grant is due, application is due in mid-July. We cannot access park grant monies if the park is turned over to resident use only, because park grant monies come from the state. So there is a lot of sentiment about keeping Ashfield Park for Ashfield residents, because we do pay for those expenses. However, the decision to have the park for resident only is in the hands of the state attorney general, because it's a complicated issue. We have not had a ruling on that, so we cannot move forward with the park grant application until we get a ruling. The AG offices had this ruling before them for almost a year with no decision. So our hands are tied in terms of applying for a park grant until this issue of residents only is decided. So for now, we will set aside this $10,000 for just the roof repair. And hopefully before the application is due in mid-July, we'll get a ruling from the AG's office to know whether we can apply or not. So, there you have it.
Go ahead, please, Mr. Gardner.
Judy, I'm so glad you brought that up. For whatever reason, I don't know if the rest of the board was aware of that situation, but certainly if there's anything we can do, or certainly Paul can do, or our legislators can do to push that along, I think we'd all be behind that. I mean, there's a lot of grant money out there for all these departments, and it's bad on us that we're not doing everything we can to move forward on that. My position, this is something that I do have a definite position on, is that we have spent nearly 30 years investing in that park, beautifying that park, improving that park, removing the highway garage from that park, and to think that we've expended all that money not to attract other people to Ashfield to be able to enjoy the lake, which is actually a state property. Yeah, I'd have a pretty firm position on that, regardless of what the Attorney General has. But if a position like that would help the Attorney General move forward, seems like if it's been sitting at the Attorney General's for so long and they haven't asked us for any opinions on where we've been trying to go for the last 30 years as far as investments in that property, it seems though they probably need to hear, and so we have a little bit of local rule.
Paul is aware of the situation. We're working with the town council to get something decided, but this has big implications, because if the AG's office decides for the town only, that eliminates any applications for tennis court restorations, which is going to come out to $150,000. $2,000. The rest of the bathhouse improvements will have to incur incrementally through raising your tax. Thank you.
Thank you, Sal. Ms. Martin. Ms. Carol, if you want to get in line, get in line.
Jenny Markins, 597 Phillips Road. This is just an informational question. If we did open this to the broader public versus just town residents, are we precluded from charging a fee for them to use that area?
It's actually currently open to residents. Legally, the way that our town council has kind of informed us is that it's technically legally open to residents from other towns.
Okay.
I mean, we don't advertise it, but
if
that's the question right now before the AG.
More formally open to other towns where we're kind of making a list in
that
direction. Can we benefit from that in some way? I'll let this person think.
One of the caveats of the Valley Trust is that the park cannot generate funds. So we have to work around that in terms of parking fees for outsiders. There's no way of regulating who's in, who's out. It's a very complex situation.
Ms. Carroll.
Well, without the talk about the park, I would just like to... Ricky Campbell Street. I'd like to thank Judy and the Park Commission because they have done an outstanding job on taking care of that park. And I just swam across the lake the other day and it is phenomenal what she's doing. Out there painting and all kind of weather and putting in benches for everybody and making sure everything is all taken care of. It's really spectacular. It helps a whole lot of people. Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
Hello, Dylan Gay, 234 Creamery Road. I'm just interested in expressing my concern about the town's maintenance on the vehicular concerns, the line item for the highway truck, and the mechanics is, forthcoming and being reputable in their performing proper vehicular maintenance. And I'm all for new trucks, as I'm sure most of you must be, but I think there's a lot of teamwork that can be improved in the mechanical community. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Pless.
Phil Glass, Gate Street. The truck, is it a pickup truck or a dump truck? What kind of truck are we getting for $120,000?
Mr. Poisson, our highway superintendent.
Tom Poisson, Creamery Road. It's the medium-sized truck. You see the bigger dump trucks, you see the pickups, you see the one that's hanging in between. The yellow flatbed. It's a 2009 Chevy 4500. That's what we're looking to replace. The quotes we have are on a Chevy 5500 with a flatbed dump, a new sander, and a plow, central hydraulic system to operate it.
Okay, Mr. Pless? Yes. Yes, please.
Hi, Amy Roberts, 550 East River Drive. I just wanted to kind of comment on how I believe it was last town meeting where we had discussed about putting an additional position for the town highway. And with that, I had asked, with that new position, can you seek somebody that can also work on maintaining some of the highway vehicles? So I guess, it's not necessarily a question or less a comment, and I just don't know. Do we have somebody up there that is working on maintenance?
Maybe Mr. Superintendent, could you use that microphone? I think Ms. Hoff said to shake this where you shake yourself, but I'm not quite sure if that's better.
So we do have people that work on the trucks. We did not add a position, but we have been, we do it in-house, or when needed, we bring in outside mechanic who comes and works at the garage on the trucks. And now, to offer a position for a mechanic would be extremely expensive. It's not a position that we need full-time mechanic. We need them as needed, and that's what we've been doing. But as you know, these mechanics are good. Some of these are $100 an hour. We certainly can't afford to pay a full-time position at $100 per hour. But we use it as needed. The trucks are maintained. I think you all know our bigger trucks we keep on a 20-year interval. Very few towns around keep their trucks for 20 years. We do, and I think we do a proper job of maintaining them. The trucks are not, there's been a few issues recently with changes in emissions controls that we have no control over ourselves. We had to purchase trucks that were in this transition period, and there was some problems developed from that. We were working through that, and now the truck manufacturers are also working through, and I think the technology is better, the diesel exhaust fluids and that type of thing. I guess the next thing will be working into electric someday, but maybe I'll be retired for that.
Thank you. Ms. Roberts, follow up? You okay? All set? Thank you. Further questions or comments? Yes, Ms. Allen again.
Just another word about parks. When somebody is elected to the park commission, it's a standing joke that the whole family is elected. And I just want to give credit to my Tom and to the incredible support that we get from town admin and the select board and to Tom Poisson. We can't do it with 3 commissioners. It's really a community effort. Thank you all very much.
Further discussion on capital projects? Ready to vote? All those in favor on capital projects, Article 23 as moved, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Any abstentions? That passes unanimously. We are at 12:30, almost. I'm more than happy to continue. Does anybody think we should break for lunch now? Break. What? Break. Somebody just said break? Take a break. So a hand went up and you say take a break. I see 2 hands go up. How many other people want to take a break right now? 1. How many do not wish to take a break now and go further? Okay, so we will continue for a little while, and I'll check with you again after a couple more articles. Meanwhile, I have something to report on the senior district. Buckland just did exactly as you did and just passed it as is. So that's 2 of the 3 towns we need in order to create, well, in order to ask the legislature to create the district. So, newsflash, just in Article 24, recap.
Mr. Moderator?
Yes, Mr. Renner.
I move that the town vote to appropriate for free cash the sums as written in Article 24 to fund capital expenditures for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2022.
Second. Second by Mr. Carter. Please, Mr. O'Leary.
Sure. These expenses are for the fire department, for personal protective equipment replacement, and we're also setting aside $175,000 towards our next fire truck. Last year we talked about this and we promised that we would continue. At that time we promised we would continue setting aside money for the next couple of years so that we could afford to buy a new fire truck. And this appropriation would bring the total saved up to $400,000, and that's about 2/3 of what we need for a new truck. And our hope is that depending on what we see for free cash certified later on this year, maybe we could move forward with that purchase later on this year. If not, we'll come before the town at next year's town meeting to complete funding for that purchase at the next town meeting.
Thank you. This too is recommended by the Finance Committee, as you know. Questions, comments, discussion? Lynn? No, shake this a little bit and use whatever that is.
I'm just, Mary Lynn, 48 Buckland Road. This is a pithy question. On Article 24, it says the town will vote to appropriate the following sums from free cash. And for the next article, it says transferred from free cash. And I thought that we transferred from free cash rather than appropriating from it. So somebody can explain that?
I would agree that in the past, we've always had transfer from free cash, but there is a difference here with no distinction, really. As long as it's coming out of free cash and going into the account that we've got it labeled for. But you're sharp, you're paying attention.
It was a good observation. Usually we use appropriate in terms of raise and appropriate to deal with taxation. This is to transfer money from one fund to pay for something. So it's really good. Distinct for a former FinCom member, our missing link. I am so sorry. Further discussion or comments? Yes, Nathaniel. State your name and where you live.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Nathaniel Brooks, 305 Main Street. I'm just curious relative to the fire engine funding, whether given the inflationary environment, the town has explored financing the purchase of a fire engine rather than setting aside cash in this inflationary time.
Well, it seems like interest rates are going up, right? And so we'd rather pay cash instead of borrowing money. We try to do that whenever possible because typically when we are looking at very large capital expenses, a $600,000 fire truck, for example, it would usually happen with a debt exclusion question, and that would increase taxes, and we try to avoid doing that. Debt exclusions are used in very special circumstances, and we try to avoid them when we can. Instead, we'd rather save up and spend cash.
Thank you. Ms. Brooks? Other questions or comments?
Mr. Moderator?
Yes, Mr. Carter.
Just a quick follow-up on that because it's an excellent question. That the other half of that or the other third of that is that the fire chief is working like so many department heads do to try to find grant money to fill that gap, to try to get something to stretch our local dollars out. That's what grant dollars do when they come into the town. So if we can get a couple $100,000, $250,000 grant because we've shown that we've already been able to commit $400,000. We just found in our experience that attracts money. That puts us in that position. And private conversation that I don't think the chief would mind me sharing with you is just before the meeting today. We had that discussion of how important that is for us to explore every possibility to try to get some gap funding because, you know, we look at these big expenses and we say, how are we going to work through them? Well, we can work through it. If we have enough time, we can always work through it. But rest assured, once you get past that big expense, that big project, there's another big project. So that's our plan is to try to attract as much grant money as we can. A good example that just happened to work out is 2 years ago. We voted a $250,000 debt exclusion to hopefully show the state that we would have some money to put towards the dam. And we had been looking for money for the state to help us with the dam. That was the switch that turned on, that all of a sudden we got grant money to the tune of $840,000 thereabouts. So it should be that we don't have to expend the whole 250 for our share, but we're trying to turn on all the switches and get as much attention as we can, and if we don't ask for it, chances are we won't ever get it. So we really need to work diligently on that.
Thank you. I think you all, oh, there he is, Fire Chief Kyle Walker.
Kyle Walker, Fire Chief, 197 Ashfield Road. So to Tom's point, I did apply the end of this past year for a $625,000 grant through FEMA, the Assistance to Firefighters Grant. That's one of the largest that departments of our size municipality go for. It could be anywhere between $30,000 grants to $1.5 million grants. So within that application, it was included the $225,000 that we had that we previously set aside. So that is on the radar that we as a town have appropriated and are working towards that. My hope is every year that we get it. Unfortunately, we've been unsuccessful for quite a few years in a row, but we're always going to try it again, and we will try again this coming year, maybe with some grant writing assistance. It is happening.
Thank you, Chief Walker. Before Chief Walker goes, anybody have a question for the Chief? Okay, thanks, Chief. Are we ready to vote on Article 24? All those in favor of Article 24 as moved, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes unanimously. Article 25, stabilization. We have a motion.
Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Carter.
This is a lot more fun than moving the one on dog licenses. I move that the town vote to transfer the sum of $100,000 from free cash to the stabilization fund.
Second.
And Mr. Lennox seconds. Please explain.
Pretty self-explanatory. This year we were blessed in October, November when we got the state to certify our free cash, which is an annual event that we had. In my experience, extraordinary free cash. I think actually my remark was that's too damn much free cash because normally we find a way to spend it. It was nearly $500,000. We have funded capital with it this year. We have used it pretty judiciously, not really expending. We didn't have to expend a lot on extra winter road expense, so we were able to save money that way. Having that large volume of free cash, this was the year. We have been many years, I would say we've probably been a half a dozen years, without putting extra money into free cash. This is the year. $100,000. This will get our balance nearly to 600. Probably says here, get close to $625,000 worth of free cash. As Mr. Markins had mentioned in the opening discussion on the overall budget, we have some financial policies that want us to keep between 10 and 15% in reserves of whatever our budget is. When we get this done, this is going to keep us in about 14%. It's going to be very good. At the close of this meeting, it should have us at about 14% reserves, which I normally call at the day after annual town meeting is the poorest day the town has. because we normally spend it all. And so this is, by other town standards, 100,000 may not be huge, but for Ashfield, this is a win-win.
Before you sit down, Mr. Carter, please see a few faces that I don't recognize here. Could you explain the difference between free cash and stabilization?
Sure. Stabilization, we probably started stabilization a long time ago. Probably 40 years ago, we started stabilization fund. And we started with, $10,000 here, $20,000 there. The idea with stabilization fund is that we're putting money aside so when we hit some financial cliff, it could have very well happened over the last 2 years, right, during COVID. Financially, if the state and the federal government hadn't done the things that they had and we had to overcome some revenue problems, we could have gone to stabilization to grab a couple $100,000. And the whole idea is stabilization is to be used so you don't have a tax rate that does this. It's actually to stabilize that, to try to keep us kind of in line with what we've been doing right along without using it, is to try to keep the tax rate somewhat level. That doesn't mean that the tax bills will be level, right? The tax bills are still doing this, but we're trying to control it where we can and try to keep some reserves as we hit these big projects. If we don't have money out of normal revenue, and instead of asking for a debt exclusion or some such thing as that may not come at the right time to be managed correctly, we can use that money. I think back to the time that we really should have had some stabilization was the flood of '87, when we had so many roads washed out. Was that '87, '88, right there? '87? We didn't have a stabilization fund of any meaningful amount at that time, where we had to put roads together quick and tear them apart. So, stabilization fund, to get back to Buzz's question, one of the big things is we just vote simple majority. We put $100,000 in. When we want to use it, it takes a 2/3 vote to take it out, which is kind of a nice passbook savings account, right?
Really good explanation. And 40 years ago, Tom Carter was a 9-year-old select boy.
Pretty close.
I remember. Even I remember. Further questions or comments? Are we ready to vote on Article 5? Yes? All in favor of Article 25 of stabilization as moved by Mr. Carter, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Any abstentions? Passes unanimously. Mr. Atlantic, you seconded that. Sure. Sure he did. Article 26, motion.
Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Goodger.
I move the town vote to appropriate from the assessor's overlay surplus the following amounts. And that is $5,000 for assessor's utility revaluation and assessor's software upgrade of also $5,000 for a total of $10,000.
Thank you. And a second? Second. By Mr. Orlando. Mr. Chair, please explain.
All right, so assessor's overlay is the amount of money raised each year to cover abatements and non-payment of taxes. The surplus is an amount the assessors have declared is no longer needed to adequately fund the overlay. And so what they're using it for is for software upgrades in the assessor's office and also for utility revaluation. So we have a lot of utilities going through town, so we like to make sure that we're up to date as far as what they're worth so that we can get as much tax revenue as we can from them.
Thank you. Discussion. Ready to vote? All those in favor of Article 26, as moved by Mr. Gujan, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Passes unanimously. Move on to Article 27.
Mr. Moderator, I move that the town vote to approve the spending limits of the revolving funds as listed in Article 27, pursuant to the Town of Ashfield bylaws and Mass General Law, Chapter 44, Section 53E and 1/2, for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2022.
Second.
Mr. Carter seconds, please.
Mr. Please.
Oh, okay. Explain, please.
Sure. So this article relates to the revolving funds for the dog license and control, the park, and the library. Every year we have to approve rolling over these revolving funds so that they can be utilized in the subsequent fiscal year. And these are the spending limits for those accounts. And dog license and control, the limit is $5,000, parks is $1,500, and library is $2,500.
Thank you. Is there anyone who needs an explanation of what a revolving fund is? Please unabashedly raise your hand. Yes, we'd like an explanation of what a revolving fund is.
So revolving funds, it's money that's used for a specific purpose, in this case dog license control, parks and library, 3 different lines. And any money that's left over from the previous fiscal year is allowed, if we vote on it, to be rolled into the subsequent fiscal year for the same purpose, right? But we have to vote on it to make it happen. It's not automatic.
Yes, Ms. Howe, and then Ms. Quigley. Ms. Quigley, would you go stand behind Ms. Howe?
Regarding the park resolving
Judy
fund.
Howe.
Judy Howe, Watson's First Corner. Regarding the park limit of spending to select meeting, no, 2 annual town meetings ago, it was raised to $3,000, and we would like it to remain $3,000 of expenditures.
You want to make that amendment?
I can make that amendment. Do I have
It's
to
got to
put
be
this over
right.
here?
I'm not doing Buzz's job, it's got to be right.
Yes, you are. You're doing a good job. Yes, we'd like it in writing. So if you could,
So do I have to do this over here?
No, not if it's at $3,000 next year.
in writing, you move from 1,500 to 3,000.
To be clear, this money comes from fees that are collected.
Okay, we don't need it in writing.
Thank you.
So we have a motion for an amendment. Now, who is very quickly behind this out? Right now, we're going to time out. We're going to move for an amendment. Is there a second in this house?
Second.
To increase from 1,500 to 3,000, right? For the park. And I think it was Phil Plesser, actually. Second. So
It's within scope.
that's a good question. So here's the problem, and I'm really glad I was just reminded of this. As you know, Massachusetts law requires that our warrant be posted so everyone has an idea of what we're going to be working on. There's a question of scope, which is the obligation of the moderator to ensure is consistent with law. So here we have a situation in which, on the one hand, 1,500 to 3,000 doubles the amount. So Jane Doe didn't have the opportunity to see that we were going to entertain a $3,000 revolving fund limit rather than a 1,500. So Jane might have come to this meeting had she known it was going to be 3,000. So I have to use my discretion to determine whether we're disadvantaging non-attendees by raising a number that appears in the warrant right now. If it was money that was going to be expended 100,000 more than what was on notice, there's no question I would say no, that's beyond the scope. So here's the way I'm going to handle this one because it's fairly negligible relative to our budget, even though it doubles the amount that appears here. Is there one voter who objects to raising $1,500 revolving fund that Ms. House wants to move to 3,000. Does anybody object to us allowing a vote on that question? So if the minutes can reflect the fact that no meeting member objects to moving it from 1,500 to 3,000. The problem with that is that Jane Doe isn't here to object, but since it's relatively negligible, I'm going to allow it. So we have a motion to amend. Does anybody want to speak to the motion to amend? Was it seconded? Yes, it was. Seconded by Mr. Pless, I think. Anybody want to speak to whether or not we should change it from $1,500 to 3,000?
Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Carter.
I have absolutely no problem with changing this. I would be in support of the amendment. It just, everyone needs to understand that what's really important in the revolving fund is to have funds that are actually revolving. So the idea at the end of the year is not to have a revolving fund that's in deficit. So it's up to everybody that's watching this, and we get reports on it when accounts go negative. And generally, long before the selectmen hear about it, someone will pump the brakes and say, you don't have enough money. So increasing the spending limit does not make more money available. It's just saying over the course of that fiscal year, it is available to spend.
Yes, further discussion. Yes.
One more question, Alton, on Ford Road. Really need that?
Well, yeah, we're just so happy.
Pleased to be back in Ashfield where there's a park commission in a lake. Todd said the money comes from fees. What fees?
Well, in the case of dog licenses and control, it's dog license fees.
Right, the park.
The park, as Judy mentioned earlier, doesn't typically collect fees. It's sort of a gray area, but we do charge for swimming lessons, things of that nature. So that would be an example of a fee that they would collect.
So is there actually $3,000?
No, this is just the spending limit. They can spend up to this amount if they have it. This is not a budget appropriation. This is just setting the limit of what they could spend out of the fee. Yeah. Yeah, right.
Say how big the account could be.
Right.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Ms. Lincoln?
Not on the amendment.
Okay. So on the amendment. You ready to vote on the amendment?
Mr. Moderator?
Who said that?
It was I.
Aye.
We would be pleased to make a recommendation if we're allowed to vote. We haven't made an informal vote. Would you like us to make a recommendation? And how would we?
On the amendment.
On the amendment.
Yes, does the Finance Committee, a quorum of which is sitting before us, have a position with respect to the proposed amendment?
We are unanimously in favor of it. And how do we document that? Does Mr. Taylor do minutes?
Yeah.
We do independent minutes, or they're in the minutes of the meeting?
They'll be in the minutes of the meeting.
So then we are unanimous.
Thank you. Useful to know. So our Finance Committee is unanimously in support of the proposed amendment. Anybody else want to speak to the amendment? Okay. All those in favor of amending the motion by increasing the limit for the park from $1,500 to $3,000. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes unanimously as amended to $3,000. Thank you. Back to the main motion, and I believe Ms. Link had a comment on the main motion.
Mary Lynn, still 48 Buffalo Road. It's more of a question going back to, I just like clarification on how this relates to Article 22, where we voted to transfer from the dog license and control funds $6,345, but it says that we're limiting the dog license and control to a spending limit of $5,000. So that seems contradictory, and I wish you could explain it.
Oh, I only wish it was contradictory. So this is how a revolving fund works to our advantage, because over time, there could be $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 in a revolving fund. So, you know, if the dog officer has a run on having to, you know, coyotes coming through town and, or stray dogs or whatever, and his expenses go up, instead of coming back and grabbing, you know, having to ask us to go through all the rigmarole of having a special town meeting to appropriate money so we can pay the bills associated with that. Those dog fees, they're just sitting over here in this account, and he can grab that as he needs it to pay those bills. So over time, we put spending limits. You know, nobody needs to get drunk with power here, but we set these limits. But the idea is, over time, that there can end up being some usable funds in those accounts. So relating back to the transfer, is excess money that was in that revolving account that we were moving over to actually fund that for the year up front. And what that did is that made room in our levy limit to spend money on some other things that were in the budget.
So we approved the 6,000 and change out of that fund, and this is in addition?
This, because there'll be dog fees, there are dog fees coming in now,
So this 5,000 would be approving up to a 5,000 in addition?
if he needs it.
If he needs it.
My
Okay, thank you.
chances
That's
are
what I wanted.
we take historically, there's very little drawn on his, if you're looking at that in particular.
Thank you, Ms. Link. Thank you, Mr. Carter. Mr. Elwell.
Will Elwell, Baptist Corner Road. While we're in the discussion of revolving funds, I just wonder if this is a place we could talk about adding the steeple restoration project to this article somehow. Could we find money to help with that?
That would clearly be beyond the scope. That would have to be, it would be beyond the scope of this article.
Okay.
If you really wanted to work on that, you're going to have a special town meeting before the end of the fiscal year, and that might be something you want to explore. The other thing I would like to point out is, here's what I would like to do. I would like to finish 2 revolving fund articles that follow this, and then break. And then after that, we'll have a couple of citizen petition referendums to consider, as well as the large-scale solar bylaw amendment to consider. In 30, Article 30, that we're about to consider, I hope. Yeah, no, I know. Hear me out, please. In 30, we're going to look at a revolving fund amendment. We could add $3,000, as Ms. Howe suggested, in the park there. Then you can see the scope necessarily, and that means next year it's going to be $3,000 for living in the park. So we could amend that. I will certainly allow that in your Article 30. So, make sense? Okay, so further discussion here on Article 27. Anybody? Ready to vote? All those in favor of Article 27 as amended by increasing 1,500 to 3,000, say, for the park, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes unanimously. Do I hear a motion on Article 28, Conservation Commission revolving fund?
Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Carter.
Mr. Moderator, I move that the town vote to authorize the Conservation Commission, pursuant to Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 44, Section 53E and 1/2, to establish and use a revolving fund with a limit of $3,000 for fiscal year 2023 to accept receipts related to the Conservation Commission's work under the Wetlands Protection Act for the purpose of funding legal advertisements in which any remaining funds may be rolled over into similar revolving funds for fiscal year 2024.
Second. Second by Mr. Olenek. Please explain anything that needs to be explained, Mr. Carter.
I've read it a few times, and I think it's kind of a word salad. But it does explain what we were talking about with the revolving fund, right? That there are fees that come in, that there's expenses that if you, Conservation Commission was working with somebody and says, well, it's going to cost $1,200 for us to look at that, and they give $1,200, but there's some engineering fees that cost $800, then you got $400 left over. This establishes that fund so that money can stay there and they can use it for the next project if needed.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. Discussion? Ready to vote? All those in favor of Article 28, Conservation Commission Revolving Fund as moved, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Passes unanimously. Is there a motion on Article 29?
Mr. Moderator.
Yes, Mr. Goodman.
I move the town vote to authorize the select board pursuant to Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 44, Section 53E and 1/2 to establish and use a revolving fund with a limit of $3,000 for fiscal year 2023 to accept receipts related to the town's police cruiser fee for the police department's vehicle maintenance, repair, and fuel, in which any remaining funds will be rolled over into a similar revolving fund for fiscal year 2024.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Mr. Carter, second. Anything else to explain there, Mr. Goodman?
No, this basically comes from mostly detail fees, so if they're out, you see them on the road, somebody's doing utility work or road work or something else like that. So these are fees that they might get, they come into this fund, and then those fees can go back out as maintenance or be used for fuel or other things. Not things, but those things.
Thank you. Questions, comments, discussion? Ready to vote? All those in favor of Article 29 as moved, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? It passes unanimously. Now, Article 30, Revolving Fund Bylaw Amendment.
Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Olenek.
I move that the town vote to amend Section 5 of the Revolving Funds General Bylaw by adding the following line to the authorized revolving fund table, and that will be the police cruiser revolving fund.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Would you please explain this, and then I'm going to remind people what happened back in Article 27.
Okay. So this article allows for the amendment of our revolving fund bylaw. It allows us to put in this police cruiser revolving fund into that table on the bylaw that you just approved in the previous article that we did create. So the previous article created the fund, and this article allows us to amend our town bylaws to put this fund into that table.
Okay, Alex, do you have an amendment to offer?
I just wanted to know why the Concom revolving fund isn't also added as a line item?
Paul? Our town administrator, Paul McClatchy III, is not an actual resident. Any objection to him speaking?
The Conservation Commission revolving fund is kind of an experiment for this coming year. Historically, what happened was somebody would do a legal advertisement, and that would be paid for out of the Conservation Commission budget. And then when that money was reimbursed, it would go into the general fund. So the idea behind the revolving fund is to have the money go into this special fund, use that to pay that, so that it doesn't have to come out of the Conservation Commission operations. This year they had so many, we had to do a reserve fund transfer. Their budget was going into negative. rather than make this a permanent, we're going to try it out for a year, see how it works, and if it does, presumably at a future town meeting, we would vote to add it, but we wanted to make sure it was working properly first.
Buzz Eisenberg, Ashfield Mountain Road. Is there any reason why we shouldn't add to this proposed amendment Ms. House suggestion that we permanently have a $3,000 limit for the parking? Is this the right place to add that? It is not. Tell me why, Mr. Burke.
Not to take up your job, take over your job, but since we already voted an amendment, that was as good as the original. From me looking at it, right? That would be
For this year.
For this year, it would be fine. If we can just have our heads together and not have too many balls in the air next year, we can just put it on the warrant and have it permanent at that.
I'm satisfied. That's good. We got 2 thumbs up. Yes, Mr. Cole.
Yeah, I'm not satisfied with that just because I just looked at the bylaws and it clearly states that there's a $1,500 spending limit in our bylaws, so we wouldn't be able to make that change on an annual basis as we just did, because it, in fact, perhaps even our vote is contrary to our bylaws that we just passed. So I think this is the right time to make that change.
I think that makes sense. Let's start again. Mr. Platchey, is there any reason why it doesn't make sense to make that change here?
I cannot think of one.
Mr. Carter?
I don't understand why we need to revisit it at this point.
Because the bylaw caps it at 1,500, so by changing it here, amending the bylaw, we're specifically saying we can do 3,000, which we just did.
I think it's up to the moderator.
I think
my position, Buzz, is town meeting can do just about whatever it damn pleases.
Well, that is quite true, okay. But, I think it makes sense to try to do what we all wanted. I mean, we passed unanimously the proposed amendment to raise it to 3,000. That's the will of the meeting, right? So we just have to make sure that we're legally doing it. Mr. Culp points out that the bylaw caps it at 1,500. We just took this action because I was not aware of the bylaw cap. Now I think we have the opportunity to amend the bylaw to 3,000 and thereby taking care of Ms. House concern. Does anybody want to speak in opposition to allowing an amendment, if there is one, to this article amending the bylaw to allow $3,000? Who had their hand up here? Ms. Quigley.
Is there, can we amend the bylaw with just, we need a 2/3 vote, or can
No.
we do it without any
General
prior
bylaws.
notice? Okay, without any prior notice.
Well, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about amending the article that amends the bylaw. And while we're amending it, why don't we add another amendment to which there was no notice? You're right. So I'm thinking that the sense of the meeting lets me feel comfortable because it's only the smallest. We're not even allocating money. It's just the limit of spending from 1,500 to 3,000. I'm not sure if this is the right thing to do. Mr. Carter is right. It is up to the moderator to make the determination. I've been moderator for a couple of decades and I haven't seen this before, so I'm sort of feeling my way through it. I think it's no harm, no foul. The Attorney General might disagree, I don't know. So you would be, we don't even have a motion on the floor. We don't even have a motion to amend the floor.
Can I make a motion?
Yes, and then if anybody objects to this motion, I want to hear your voice.
I move that we amend Article 30 by adding a spending limit for the park revolving fund of $3,000.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Howe. Yes, please.
So I think it's important that this passes in particular because otherwise I think that our amendment to the previous article may be in violation of our bylaws, and so I think it's important that these go hand in hand.
Thank you, Mr. Coleman. Thank you. Anybody who really disagrees with what we're doing here, I'd love to hear from you. Mr. Rice.
Alan Rice, South Street. How does this impact Article 27 that we already voted on to increase that revolving fund down?
I think if we're lucky and ratified, yeah. If we're lucky, it'll be seen as having done that retroactively,
Okay.
right? Mr. Lamb.
Question for Mr. Culp is, in section 5 that you're reading now with bylaws, is the parks spending limit revolving fund the only one? Only other one that's capped, or can the amendment cover more than that?
Yes, sorry, there's a table which describes the spending limits for the dog license and control park and library that are set, which were originally in Article 27, because they're just copied from year to year from those limits.
So those are already set at those higher limits, I think.
5,000 for dog license, the park is 1,500, the library is 25,000.
Okay.
Any other comments? This is interesting, maybe it's not interesting, but it's interesting to me. We're trying to authorize what we've already done. Yes? Good to see you.
Aaron Nelson, Melvin Mill Road. I'm just wondering, do we need to set a spending authority, like it has in the police cruiser revolving fund, as well as the revenue source of use of funds, or do we not? As part of the amendment.
Anyone address that? I can speak to that.
Mr. Cole.
It's already all established in the bylaws, authorization and revenue source. So this is just increasing the spending of those other issues that are already established.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Any other discussion? We're voting on amendment. Mr. Carter.
So, I had no problem with this, except we can go through all of this and we can increase the limits to the moon, but if there's no money in the account, it doesn't really move the ball forward at any aspect for anybody.
Right, that's always true.
Right.
Okay. So we're voting just, if we're ready to vote, are we ready to vote on the amendment, Mr. Cole's amendment, that we add to this Article 30 revolving fund bylaw amendment? We add yet another amendment, which would be to authorize the revolving fund to be up to $3,000 for the park. Right? All those in favor of that amendment, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstaining? Good, so when they send me to jail, I can say they made me do it. Back to the main motion. All those in favor of Article 30, the revolving fund, or is there, I'm sorry, any other discussion? Article 30, the main motion. All those in favor of the revolving fund bylaw amendment as amended by adding the park with a $3,000 limit to our bylaws, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstention? That passes unanimously. So to the meeting, I say this, I think it is time for us to take a break. It is 1:15. When we come back, we're going to have two petitions, referenda to consider, and we're going to have the large-scale zoning amendment to consider. I'm going to ask for a motion to suspend, but coming back at 2 o'clock, works for people? 45 minutes? What are you holding?
Handouts to you.
Handouts, thank you very much. Mr. Clark, Mr. Rice, your motion is somewhere?
I thought I saw our amendment out there.
I didn't place it there if you didn't place it there. We'll have copies made. You have copies? Okay, so listen, folks. There are handouts with respect to Article 33. I'm sorry, gentlemen, just let me make sure that people know. There are going to be, phrasing is going to be different in the motion. That's always the case for Article 33, but there are going to be 6 amendments proposed. They are in writing. Mr. Clark has left them out on the table there, so you can see them and consider them. Coming back at 1 o'clock, is there a motion to suspend suspend until 1 o'clock? So moved by everybody. All in favor, say aye. 2 o'clock, 2 o'clock.